The government?
The government. Do you trust them?
I mean, no.
You know, sometimes I don't know. And especially when we go through this list, they've done some very sketchy things. You know, conspiracies do happen sometimes.
Yeah. And sometimes they turn out to be true. I mean, like, I want to think that the government has our best interest at heart, but sometimes I just don't know. Now, some of you may have seen the viral meme where a certain conspiracy theorist slams his hand on the table and loudly declares, "I'm sick of them putting chemicals in the water that turn the frickin' frogs gay." I'm not gonna say his name, but I'm sure many of you know who I'm talking about. Now, I know this man has said some incredibly offensive, insensitive, outlandish, and downright terrible things, but believe it or not, this particular theory might actually be true. Well, partly true that is. You see, in the early 2000s there was a study done that involved a pesticide by the name of atrazine. That's A-T-R-A-Z-I-N-E, because you just might want to know that information. The study also involved a group of African clawed frogs. Tadpoles raised in atrazine contaminated waters actually became hermaphrodites, developing both male and female reproductive organs. When adult male frogs were introduced into the waters, they stopped producing their male hormones and their reproductive organs became feminized. What's really scary is that the waters used in these experiments had atrazine levels as low as 0.1 parts per billion, which is 30 times lower than levels allowed in our drinking water. Atrazine is currently used in the United States, Canada, and Australia. Why? I have no clue. It really doesn't seem necessary or all that smart. Is this all some kind of strange government experiment? Maybe not, but also probably yes. It's like super weird, and also just like don't use it, but okay.
Next on the list, we have the Nina Kulagina experiments. So Nina Kulagina was born in Russia in 1926, and from a very young age, she started to notice that objects seemed to move on their own around her, especially when she was angry. She grew up realizing that she had psychokinetic abilities, which she claimed to have inherited from her mother. She joined the Red Army at 14 years old in the tank regiment during World War II. And then after the war, the Soviet government took notice of her strange abilities and began performing experiments with her. There is footage of her performing some of her psychic abilities, making small objects move on their own, apparently just with her mind. She was even said to have stopped a frog's heart from beating during one of these sessions. Now, did she truly have special abilities? Was she just a simple charlatan? Not 100% certain, but what is certain is that the USSR was very interested in her during the Cold War, and according to some, they even set out to see if she could take out enemies just by using her mind.
Next on our list we have Operation Red Hat, which involved accidentally releasing potentially harmful biological agents onto an unsuspecting public. The operation took place in 1971 and was conducted by a military testing facility in Utah. The purpose of the operation was to test various methods of disposal for chemical warfare agents. One of the methods involved burning the agents, including VX, which is an incredibly lethal nerve agent in open air pits. Yeah, you heard me. A room full of scientists, and no one thought to say maybe we shouldn't burn deadly chemicals in an open air pit. Okay. Of course it was an incredibly bad idea, as the act allegedly led to the release of a variety of toxic chemicals into the atmosphere that wafted into nearby civilian populations and very negatively affected them. It's assumed that a large number of people became incredibly ill and even died as a result of inhaling the air contaminated with the toxic agents, but I could have told you that. They need to think a little more.
It's not just Russia that took an interest in someone with supposed special abilities, but the USA as well. Uri Geller is a much more well-known name than Nina Kulagina. This guy was kind of like the Chris Angel of the 70s, even appearing on talk shows like Johnny Carson. Geller is a self-proclaimed psychic and would also perform stuff like spoon bending. Now apparently there was also some less publicized stuff going on with him involving the CIA. This was the 70s, so the Cold War was still a thing. Not as tense as it had been in the 50s and 60s, but still present. So the CIA were very interested in the possibility of special abilities and if they'd be able to implement them into military operations. So they conducted a series of tests on Geller in 1973, focusing on his supposed clairvoyant abilities. In one of these experiments, scientists they did a test where they chose a random word from a dictionary while Geller was isolated in another room. He was supposed to draw what they'd picked without seeing or hearing them. Of course, they picked the word fuse. Now strangely, apparently when Geller came out of his isolated room, having no way of knowing what word they'd chosen, he had sketched a picture of a firecracker. Speaking of UFOs, let's talk alien technology. What highly advanced technology could have been used to make a ship teleport and travel through time? Well, maybe they had access to some kind of alien technology which they'd been reverse engineering. Where would they have gotten this technology? Possibly from a crashed UFO, or maybe extraterrestrials had a direct hand in the experiment. This is kind of the first place a lot of our brains go with wild stories like this. I mean, how could humans have manufactured something like this, especially in the late 30s or early 1940s? It's debatable when this case actually happened. Of course, entities from outer space, would have had to be involved. Some claim that the aliens provided not just the technology, but also the knowledge on how to use it, and this alleged partnership could still be going on to this day.
Alright you guys, remember Morris K. Jessup and good old Carl Allen? Good, because here's where things get weird. And by weird, I mean here's where things start looking like maybe Carl Allen wasn't crazy, and the government is working overtime to have him and anyone else who knows sensitive details about the experiment silenced. For a while, Jessup had forgotten about Carl until a year later when two officers from the ONR, the Office of Navy Research, turned up at Jessup's door. Why? Well, they had received a copy of Jessup's book, The Case of the UFO, with annotations written into the margins by what at first appeared to be three different people but later turned out to be just one person. You guessed it, Carl Allen. The annotations outlined the Philadelphia experiment in great detail and even alluded to, as James said, alien involvement in the project. Here's the thing though, if Allen was a nutjob spreading false truths about some kind of made-up government project, then why did the ONR care? And why did they care so much that they had to show up to Jessup's house?
Was the Philadelphia experiment an intentional attempt at time travel? Maybe the US Navy wasn't just trying to render the USS Eldridge invisible, they'd been attempting to manipulate time all along. The idea is that by generating powerful electromagnetic fields around the vessel, scientists hoped to create a sort of wormhole, a portal that would enable the ship to jump instantaneously to different points in history. And what would the point of this be, aside from the pure novelty of it, of course? Well, I mean, the ability to travel through time and alter the course of history, that would make you pretty much unstoppable.
Here's where things get dark. By the time the 1950s rolled around, Morris Jessup's career had taken a major dip. His latest book was a massive failure and he was dropped by his publisher. And so, in a last-ditch effort to regain some kind of notoriety in both the scientific and extraterrestrial communities, he decided to write a book about the Philadelphia experiment, a book that unfortunately would never see the light of day. Jessup began gathering all of the letters Allen had sent to him and doing a serious deep dive into the legitimacy of his claims, and in 1958, I guess he found something. He gave a folder full of information to a friend of his named Ivan Anderson and begged him to keep it safe just in case something bad happened, which, as you've probably already guessed by now, it did. On April 19th of 1959, Jessup made a call to his friend Mason Valentine. During the phone call, Jessup revealed that he had made a breakthrough in his research and that he wanted to meet with Valentine the following day to discuss. Fast forward to that day, April 20th, 1959, Jessup is found dead in his car from carbon monoxide poisoning. There is a hose lodged into his exhaust and washcloths are pressed onto the windows to keep any fumes from escaping. No autopsy is conducted and his death is ruled self-inflicted. While some of the letters between Jessup and Allen are able to be viewed online, the rest of Jessup's research was never found. Either that or the government found it, and they probably killed him as well, like they most likely killed Jessup.
Now, visibility, time travel, teleportation, aliens, All very fun ideas, sure, but what's actually the most likely explanation? Degaussing. Degaussing is a technique used to eliminate unwanted magnetic fields in objects, in this case ships and submarines. Basically, they were trying to make their subs undetectable to enemy mines. In degaussing, the ship's hull is subjected to strong electrical currents or magnetic fields to neutralize the magnetism that builds up over time from the Earth's magnetic field and electronic equipment that's on board. In the case of the Philadelphia experiment, though, maybe they were working on something more advanced, a more extreme version of degaussing. Instead of just neutralizing the ship's magnetic field to evade enemy mines or submarines, they could have been experimenting with methods to completely cloak the USS Eldridge from radar detection. This would involve not only demagnetizing the ship, but also manipulating electromagnetic fields to bend light around the vessel, essentially making it invisible.
Next up, we have Operation Big Buzz, which took place in 1955, and once again involved exposing the public to incredibly dangerous biological agents. Yay! In this case, it was yellow fever along with some other highly contagious diseases. Over 30,000 infected mosquitoes were released throughout several southeastern United States. While the mosquitoes were supposedly not infected with live pathogens of the diseases, the experiment was still deemed highly unethical by the general public, who had received no warning of the operation before it took place. So, what was the point of the government releasing hundreds of thousands of mosquitoes carrying allegedly deadly viruses onto the general public? Well, many people believe it was a test run designed to see just how effective the infected mosquitoes were at transmitting the various viruses to humans in a range of different environmental conditions, presumably to test how mosquitoes would perform as vessels for biological warfare agents.
Alright, next up, we have the occultism practices of the SS during World War II. Not only does the man who shall not be named, whose name starts with H, not only did he win the award for history's most evil man, but he's also one of the weirdest as well. He took things to comic book levels of villainy, though, when he began having the Third Reich delve into the realm of the occult. Most of this was led by one of his right-hand men, Heinrich Himmler, who was very into occult stuff. They would seek out ancient artifacts that were believed to hold special powers. There were experiments done on psychokinesis. They'd perform dark rituals. One of the most famous locations they used for some of these rituals was Huska Castle in the Czech Republic, said to have been built over a bottomless pit to hell. Apparently, they'd attempt to summon up demonic powers to aid in their crusade. It's absolutely insane. It's like Indiana Jones. It's just, yeah.
Next on the list we have HAARP. That's HAARP, the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program that controls the weather. Maybe. The HAARP uses powerful radio waves between 3 and 30 million hertz to heat ionospheric plasma. What is ionospheric plasma? Well, it's a mix of electrons, atomic and molecular ions, and neutral particles that exist within the ionosphere surrounding the Earth, which protects us from the sun's harmful UV rays and what can only be described as unpredictable space weather. With all that being said, I don't really think it's that far-fetched for people to believe that by manipulating and heating ionospheric plasma, the government is quite literally actively experimenting with it. Duh. Exploring the effects of changes to this layer in the Earth's atmosphere that directly relates to Earth temperature regulation, it's kinda weird. Is it getting hot in here, or is it just the government secretly experimenting? You tell me, but actually let me know in the comments because I do like to read them.
Alright, next on the list we have the Robert J. White experiments. Fair warning, things get kinda icky here, especially if you're an animal lover. For some reason in the 50s, 60s, and even into the 70s, there were a number of experiments done with animals that involved taking the head of one animal and then placing it on a different body, like Sid from Toy Story, and then seeing if the animal would live. This was done with dogs, frogs, monkeys, cats. Well, in 1970, the US government funded an experiment carried out by Robert J. White, where he transplanted the head of a monkey onto the body of another, and was actually successful. This new Franken monkey could hear, it could smell, it could taste, and it could even follow objects with its eyes for just over a week, and then it died.
Next up, we have that one time the United States government spent millions of taxpayer dollars trying to figure out the validity of psychic and paranormal phenomenon, which James has touched upon in 2 points already. But like, honestly, they could have saved a lot of money if they had just given James and I $500 each to spend a night on Poveglia Island, the most haunted island in Italy, and we could like telepathically tell them the ghosts that we saw. But that's another story. The main goal of the project was to determine whether or not a person could use psychic abilities to gather information about distant or hidden opposing operations. Many experiments were conducted to determine whether or not individuals were able to provide specific details regarding locations, objects, or events using only their minds. There are theories out there that claim that part of the experimentation involving paranormal research was geared towards psychic espionage, which again, James mentioned. Believe it or not, the project was ultimately considered a success, and while critics and skeptics continue to doubt the validity of psychic ability, it's actually not uncommon to see psychics working as valued members of the law, including CIA and FBI agents.
And finally, we have the secret experiments going on in Antarctica. Antarctica looks to be this mass of frozen wasteland, right? But for some reason, there are a number of government-run bases set up there, and while some of what goes on is disclosed to the public, there's other stuff that's a bit more mysterious. The United States and Russia are said to have set up secret research facilities in Antarctica to study alien technology and artifacts. These bases are equipped with advanced scientific equipment and are being run by elite scientists and military personnel. At least that's how the story goes. But some even claim that these facilities have made contact with extraterrestrials. So why Antarctica? Well, Antarctica is said to be a hotspot for UFOs, first of all. It does sound pretty far-fetched, but if aliens really were visiting Earth but wanted to stay out of sight, Antarctica would be a pretty prime spot. There are no permanent residents, and it's vast. So the idea of there being leftover alien technology buried under ice that scientists are researching or reverse engineering still sounds completely nuts, but you never really know, right?
Invisibility, force fields, teleporting, time travel, and the USS Eldridge. What do all 5 of these things have in common? If you said the Philadelphia experiment, gold star, you're correct. While it has yet to be definitively proven, the Philadelphia experiment took place in the late 1930s. The Navy had been working tirelessly on a way to make their warships undetectable to underwater magnetic mines by using electromagnetism technologies thought up by Einstein. Upon hearing about the technology and the idea of wrapping warships in electromagnetic coils, it is said that Nikola Tesla himself issued a warning to von Neumann, a physicist working on the project, saying that there was a great possibility the use of the coils might result in a personal problem. Despite the warning, Neumann and Einstein went ahead and decided to test their technology. It worked, but then they tested it again. This time, the ship, in this case the USS Eldridge, became surrounded by a green ozone-laden haze before vanishing directly into thin air, and then turning up in Norfolk, Virginia, 250 miles away from where it was previously in Philadelphia. Not only that, but when the USS Eldridge arrived in Virginia, it was actually 10 minutes earlier in the day. 20 minutes after that, or 10 minutes from the ship's original disappearance time in Philadelphia, it reappeared back in Philly. Sounds like time travel teleportation to me.
Some think the Philadelphia experiment formed the basis for the Montauk project that came later, another secretive government project that's never officially been recognized, but for years there have been rumors about this program having existed. It all supposedly went down at Camp Hero, a decommissioned Air Force base in Montauk, New York. It's said that the project kicked off in the 70s with the government aiming to develop powerful psychological warfare techniques. The base reportedly housed a massive radar tower used to manipulate the human mind. According to some whistleblowers, there was a device known as the Montauk Chair, which was allegedly capable of unlocking psychic abilities. With this device, people could manifest objects out of thin air or even apparently travel through time. The most famous whistleblower is Preston Nichols, who claimed to have recovered memories memories of his involvement in these experiments. He detailed his experiences in a series of books about the project. The first one, the Montauk Project Experiments in Time, came out in 1992. And the entire series has been dubbed as science fiction, even though Nichols himself claims the books were not written as pure entertainment.
So, what happens to the crew of a ship that gets engulfed in green fog, teleported back and forth, and entangled with the likes of space-time? Well, it's not good. According to eyewitnesses, when the USS Eldridge reappeared in Philadelphia, crew members were suffering from 3rd and 4th degree burns, confusion, dizziness, disorientation, and even infusion. Infusion, as in certain members of the crew had literally somehow become fused into the ship's metal, and some actually never made it back at all. Those infused into the ship died in extreme physical, and one can only assume psychological pain. Others went insane. Which makes sense. I mean, how do you think your brain would react if you were serving in the US military in the 1930s and then all of a sudden the ship that you were on teleported twice to 2 places in 20 minutes, and then also found a bunch of your coworkers infused into a metal frame? You'd probably freak the hell out.
As Hannah said, some of the crew never made it back, so where did they go? Well, it's impossible to say for sure, especially if this ship really did teleport and travel through time. The possibilities here could be endless. When the USS Eldridge allegedly vanished from the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, some think that the sailors could have been instantaneously transported to a parallel dimension, a realm where the rules of time and space are entirely different from our own, and maybe some of the crew is still trapped there, like Captain Kirk in the Nexus, forever lost in this alternate universe. They may have also been flung into the distant past or future and are still, or were still, or will still be stuck there. Some believe the missing crew members didn't even disappear by accident, but were teleported to a secret military base where they were used in other future experiments. And here's a super creepy concept. Could the sailors have been phased out of our reality altogether, stuck in an in-between state, partially existing in our world but unable to actually interact with it? Kind of like ghosts.
The popularity of the Philadelphia experiment is really thanks to 2 special men, Morris K. Jessup and Carlos Allende, aka Carl Allen. Morris K. Jessup was a scientist with a master's in astronomy and also an author. By the 1930s, he had already published a very successful book, The Case for the UFO, Identifying Flying Objects, and that book had garnered the attention of many extraterrestrial enthusiasts, excited to finally have the words of a scientist back their claims of intelligent life forms living out in space. And of course, one of these excited enthusiasts just so happened to be Carlos Allende, who wrote to Jessup to inform him of the events that transpired on the day the Philadelphia experiment took place. He told Jessup all about the ship's disappearance and reappearance in the harbor, which he had witnessed from a nearby merchant ship, and he even explained how it was possible too. By applying Einstein's unified field theory, the military was able to merge electromagnetism and gravity into a single field. When Jessup wrote Carlos back asking for proof, Carlos replied with more stories of the horrors he had witnessed on the day the experiment took place. The deaths of so many men, 1 who walked right through a wall, and 2 who burst into flames and burnt for 18 days straight. Apparently. It was then that Jessup decided he had had enough and stopped replying to the letters. Besides, the US Navy had already claimed that the USS Eldridge hadn't been anywhere near Philadelphia or Virginia that day, so in Jessup's mind, this Carlos guy, whose real name was actually Carl Allen, was probably just some nutcase superfan. Or was he?
So let's dive into one of the most messed up programs the CIA ever ran, MK Ultra. And if you don't know about it, prepare yourself because it's pretty wild. This program started in 1953 and ran all the way up to 1973. The CIA wanted to figure out ways to control people's minds, to turn them into perfect spies, and to manipulate them into doing whatever the government wanted. They experimented with hallucinogens and other illicit substances on unknowing people, basically trying to see if they could brainwash them. Most disturbingly, they didn't ask for consent. Some people didn't even know that they were part of an experiment. Imagine getting dosed with something without knowing and just watching your world slowly spiral out of control. The CIA also tried sensory deprivation, sleep deprivation, and other forms of manipulation to try and break the victims down. One of the more famous stories from MKUltra is Frank Olson, a CIA employee who was dosed with a hallucinogen without knowing it. A few days later, Olson fell from a hotel window and died. Officially, it was ruled that he'd taken his own life, but many think it had to do with the substances messing with his mind. Some even think that he'd been killed. Eventually, though, the whole MKUltra thing came to light, and people were horrified. The CIA destroyed most of the records, but what has been revealed paints a pretty disturbing picture of just how far the US government was willing to go in the name of research. Tuskegee syphilis study. If you haven't heard of it, you should. This is one of the darkest chapters in American medical history. It ran from 1932 all the way to 1972, and that is a very long time considering this whole thing was a massive violation of human rights. The US government and the Public Health Service decided to track the long-term effects of syphilis by studying a group of poor African American men living in Alabama. They didn't tell them that they had syphilis, and they didn't treat them for it either, even though penicillin had been discovered and was known to cure the disease by 1947. Instead of treating these men, they were told that they had something called the bad BLOOD and were just being observed for a study. They were kept in the dark while the researchers watched them get sicker and sicker. In fact, the researchers went out of their way to make sure the men didn't get treatment elsewhere. By the time the study was exposed, over 100 men had died from the disease, and many others suffered from severe complications, including blindness, paralysis, and heart problems. The people involved were treated like lab rats, denied basic treatment, and lied to for decades. At first, they'd been told the so-called experiment was only going to last for 6 months. Instead, it was 40 years, and through most of it, there was a known cure for the disease that they didn't even tell the men that they had. It's unbelievable, but it happened. Project 4.1 was tied to the US nuclear testing in the Marshall Islands in the 50s. Basically, after World War II, the US wanted to test the power of nuclear bombs, so they decided to detonate a bunch of them in the Pacific. The US Atomic Energy Commission ran Project 4.1, which was supposed to monitor how the people living in the nearby areas were affected by radiation exposure. Again, no one bothered to tell them how dangerous this stuff was and that they were going to be exposed to massive amounts of radiation from the tests. It's really not that they didn't bother to, they actively avoided telling them. That's really what it was. They were left to suffer from cancer, birth defects, and all kinds of other diseases caused by the fallout. The US government didn't compensate the people for years, but eventually they did throw some money at them, as if that really helps. Many of the islands are still contaminated and people can't live on some of them. The US government basically sacrificed an entire population for the sake of military testing. After World War II, again, the US found itself in a bit of a dilemma. They wanted to get their hands on some of the best minds in Germany, specifically the scientists and engineers who worked on rockets and weapons. So instead of bringing them to trial for all the war crimes that had just happened, the government secretly brought them over to the States and gave them cushy new jobs as part of Operation Paperclip. They let scientists from the Third Reich off the hook for their involvement in horrible experiments just so the US could take advantage of their smarts. The most famous example is Werner von Braun, who'd helped develop Yahtzee Germany's rocket program. He was brought over to help the US space program, eventually leading to the Apollo moon landing. But it wasn't just rocket scientists. Some of these men had been involved in experiments on humans, including the use of concentration camp prisoners for medical tests. The US government knew this, but to them, winning the Cold War with the Soviets was more important than holding war criminals accountable. In the 1950s, the US Army decided to test biological weapons by spraying bacteria over San Francisco. They literally released bacteria into the air to see how a city might react to a biological attack. The bacteria they used, Bacillus globigii. You know what? Anything you can't pronounce is just not good, right? You don't want it in your food. You certainly don't want it in the air. It's just like the things that you can pronounce are just typically better for you. It's like on food packages, where it just lists all these messed up names. Just don't eat that stuff. Anyway, it was supposed to be harmless in small doses, but they didn't tell the people of San Francisco, once again, that they were being experimented on. The army wanted to see how easily a biological agent could spread, and the residents of San Francisco were basically used as test subjects. I mean, they were. While the bacteria wasn't supposed to be harmful, it ended up getting people sick, and some even died. The military kept the whole thing secret for years, and when it eventually did come out, the public was, of course, furious. The army had put thousands of people's health at risk just to test the potential effects of a biological weapon. ProntoPro, the FBI's covert surveillance program that ran from 1956 to 1971. This program was designed to keep an eye on civil rights groups and political organizations in the States. The FBI didn't just spy on these groups, they also tried to destroy them. From the inside, groups like the Black Panther Party and Martin Luther King Jr.'s Southern Christian Leadership Conference were targeted by this organization, along with the anti-Vietnam War activists. The FBI used every dirty trick in the book: wiretaps, forged letters, anonymous threats to sow distrust in the movements they were targeting. In one infamous incident, the FBI sent an anonymous letter to Martin Luther King Jr. in an attempt to blackmail him into taking his own life. Project Sunshine sounds like it should be about solar energy or something positive like that, but it's on this list, so it was anything but. Back in 1953, the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission started secretly studying the effects of radioactive fallout on the human body. So to do that, they needed human bodies. Not live ones, thankfully, but they ended up using bodies of people who had died, often without their family's permission. In 1955, Dr. Willard Libby, the commissioner, openly talked about needing these remains for research. He said something along the lines of, "I don't know how to get them, but it is of prime importance to get them, especially from young people. If anyone knows how to do body snatching well, they'll be serving their country." Where's Ed Gein when you need him? It sounds like a dark joke. This was basically the government admitting they were going to dig up human remains without consent, and that's what they did. Scientists were snatching up bodies from graves to see how radiation would affect their organs and bones. Families had no idea, because, if they did, they obviously wouldn't have signed off on it. What's the point in burying someone if you're just going to let them get dug up later and blasted with radioactive fallout? Also in the 50s, psychologist Harry Harlow wanted to study depression and social behavior, so he took a bunch of baby rhesus monkeys and separated them from their mothers, then put them in isolation cages he called the Pit of Despair. As you can probably imagine, the effects were not pleasant. The monkeys were completely traumatized. Some refused to interact with other monkeys when they were reintroduced, couldn't form social bonds, and later failed as parents. These were creatures who'd never experienced normal social life. It destroyed them completely. Harlow claimed the research proved how important attachment is, and technically he was right, but did we really need to do an experiment like this to find that out? Wasn't that pretty obvious? In the 60s, psychologist Stanley Milgram wanted to see how far people would go when told to obey authority. To test it, he brought volunteers into a lab and told them they'd be helping with a learning study. The volunteers were told that whenever the person in the next room got a question wrong, they were supposed to press a switch that delivered an electric shock. What they didn't know was that the person in the other room wasn't being shocked at all. He was just an actor, and the reactions were pre-recorded, but the volunteers thought it was all real. They heard shouts of pain as the actor in the next room would beg them to stop, but most people kept going because the guy in a lab coat was telling them that it was important to continue the test. And they went as far as to deliver what they believed were dangerous voltage levels. Now, this was obviously more ethical than the other experiments we've talked about so far. At least nobody was physically harmed, but the psychological effect this had on the volunteers was huge. A lot of them left the lab feeling sick about what they'd just done, thinking they might have actually nearly killed someone. But the study showed something deeply disturbing. You don't necessarily need to be a cruel person to do cruel things. Sometimes all it takes is someone in a position of authority telling you to. In September 1950, people in San Francisco woke up like it was any other day, completely unaware that a Navy ship sitting just offshore was spraying a cloud of bacteria into the air. This was part of a secret Cold War test. Nobody living there was told. The Navy just did it. They used two types of bacteria that they thought were relatively harmless. So harmless, supposedly, that they felt completely comfortable pumping them into a city of roughly 800,000 people. Well, over the next few days, doctors at Stanford Hospital noticed a cluster of rare infections called serratia. 11 people got sick. One of them, a man named Edward Nevin, ended up with a bacteria in his heart valve and died. At the time, nobody had any idea this was connected to a military test. The truth didn't come out until the 70s when Senate investigations started digging into secret Cold War experiments. Now let's head to Sweden, to the Vipholm Hospital in Lund, where between 1947 and 1949, researchers were studying how sugar affects teeth. Instead of testing on volunteers who fully understood the risks, though, they used mentally disabled patients, people who couldn't give proper consent. The researchers loaded them up with sugary foods, candy, chocolate, those super sticky toffees you gotta take like an electric sander to your teeth to get rid of. Basically, they used anything that would rot their teeth as fast as possible. Unsurprisingly, their participants ended up with cavities all over their teeth, and the results weren't shared publicly for decades. The confectionery industry had helped fund the research, thinking there'd be no correlation between tooth decay and sugar, so they were not too thrilled about the results, and they paid to have the study kind of kept under wraps afterward.
We have the rat pigs. The Salk Institute for Biological Studies in the US has been known to run a number of crossbreeding experiments. One was performed on rats and pigs. The team of scientists decided to take stem cells from rats and inject them into pig blastocysts. However, this failed, and I mean, I'm not surprised. Rats and pigs have different gestation times, and genetically they are very different. But imagine a pig that looked like a rat. Okay, that is terrifying. In our 9th spot, we have the human Z attempts. In 1967, scientists in China were working on creating a human-chimp mix. Sadly, not much information about these experiments have been disclosed to the public. But rumor has it that the experiments didn't really work. They wanted to basically create a chimp that could talk fluently in whatever language it was taught. Then in 1981, they tried this experiment again. They impregnated a female chimpanzee with human sperm. Turns out, the chimp did manage to get pregnant by it, but sadly passed away 3 months later due to complications. Coming in at number 8, we have the rat mouse. Scientists at the Salk Institute have found a way to grow the pancreatic tissue of a mouse inside of a rat. The mouse pancreas was able to grow inside of rats successfully. So they grew these new pancreases from mouse stem cells that were then placed in the bodies of the rats. And then when the pancreases were complete, they transplanted them back into the mice. Now the biggest thing about this experiment is that this technique could reverse diabetes in the mice. So they hope that one day they can grow organs inside the bodies of different animals, and then you transplant those organs into humans to cure diabetes. Of course, there's still so much work to be done on this. The last thing they want is to grow a human organ inside of an animal and then have the recipient's body reject it. In our 7th spot, we have the killer bees. Did you know that killer bees were accidentally created by scientists? If they're out here creating bees that threaten the ecosystem, then who's to say they won't create animals that do the same? Basically, this all started in the 1950s. A biologist was commissioned by the Brazilian government to create a species of bees that would increase honey production. But along the way, things went wrong. The biologist himself didn't have much experience with animal breeding. In the end, bees from southern Africa and local Brazilian honeybees mated, and it produced these angry killer bees. And then of course, thousands of these bees just accidentally escaped. Now they get their name because when pissed off, they have been known to chase people down for more than a quarter mile. And on top of that, their stings are very painful. These bees are also aggressive towards other bees as well. So it puts them at risk, and now we're kinda just stuck with them. In our 6th spot today, we have the human mouse. In the late 90s, 3 doctors started doing experiments to try and create human body parts in a lab. One of these experiments involved growing a human ear on the back of a mouse. So they did this by creating an ear-shaped scaffolding and putting cells of cartilage from a cow on it. They then put the mouse under anesthetic and placed this ear under its skin. Crazily enough, the mouse's body fed the cow cartilage cells. The scaffolding dissolved and the mouse grew this artificial shape of a human ear. But it was only the outside of an ear. Okay, it didn't work, there was no eardrum. Now you might be wondering why they did this. Well, their hope is that this will help plastic surgeons when reconstructing human ears for their patients. So they would create this ear on the mouse and then graft it onto the person. So you'd have an ear that is part mouse, part cow. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the goat with human milk. I swear I didn't make this up, it's real and I'm a little disturbed. But basically, scientists have figured a way for goats to produce human breast milk. They did this by transferring human breast milk enzymes and proteins into goat embryos. In the end, they found that the milk the goats were producing wasn't 100% human, but it contained 60% of the lysosome and lactoferrin found in human milk. Now, why do they want goats producing human breast milk? Well, it could feed and save babies in need. Plus, it would have a longer shelf life. Would you try this milk? Let me know in the comments below. I've heard breast milk is pretty sweet, but I don't think I want to try it. Coming in at number 4, we have the Belgian Super Cow. Now, you guys know how much I love cows. And if you didn't know, then hi, my name is Lindsay and I love cows. But this thing is terrifying. It's monstrous, okay? It's super ripped and it's just massive. The Belgian super cows were created back in the 1800s when Belgian scientists and farmers mixed native cattle with shorthorn cattle. Then over the time, they would select the biggest and strongest offsprings of each variety and then breed them together. So on and so on, bam! You got a super cow, which is definitely the biggest and strongest, and I understand why they call it the super cow. Like, just look at this beast, okay? It could crush anyone. In our 3rd spot, we have the Enviro Pig. So pig waste is actually pretty toxic. I mean, if you've seen the Simpsons movie, then you'd know all about it. I mean, that was a bit of an exaggeration, but still. Anyways, pig's waste contains really high levels of phosphorus. This phosphorus ends up in lakes and rivers and oceans and can cause a boom of algae. So scientists were trying to come up with a way for pigs to have less toxic waste, hence the creation of the Enviro Pig. Enviro pigs are pigs with up to 65% less phosphorus in their excrements. This pig was first created in 1999 at the University of Guelph's Farm in Canada. This pig had its phytase gene attached to a piece of mouse DNA. Now, it's really complicated to explain, but here's an explanation, and I quote, "The genetically altered pig was created using genetic material from a mouse and an E. coli bacterium to reduce phosphorus in the pig's feces. In the end, it made the pig excrete fewer pollutants." Moving on to number 2, we have the pig with human blood. Now, you're probably noticing a trend by now. Pigs and mice are the scientists' test subjects of choice. Researchers at Mayo Clinic in Minnesota have managed to create pigs made out of human blood. So the pigs have human blood pumping through their veins. Not only that, but some of the cells in the blood merge together to create pig-human cell hybrids. Now, the reason behind this all is to allow scientists to study how viral infections can transfer from animals to humans. And in our number 1 spot today, we have Oliver the chimp. In the 1970s, there was a performing chimpanzee that received a lot of attention. His name was Oliver. Now, Oliver was really different from other chimps for a number of reasons. The main being that Oliver might have been a successful mix between a human and a chimp. Yeah, you heard me. A lot of doctors and scientists are convinced that Oliver was a humanzee. It's believed that they inseminated a female chimp with male sperm, and Oliver was the offspring. Now let's take a look at the facts. Oliver didn't look like other chimps. In fact, he had a more human-like appearance. He had a flatter face than other chimpanzees, and he walked on 2 feet instead of all 4s. He also preferred human females over female chimpanzees, and he understood humans very well. So could it be that Oliver was actually half human, half chimp?
Glowfish are probably one of the most famous examples of genetically modified pets. These little fish, which are actually zebrafish, were engineered in 1999 to glow in the dark. The trick? Scientists inserted a jellyfish gene into the zebrafish, causing them to produce a fluorescent protein that makes them glow under ultraviolet light. The idea behind the glowing fish was actually pretty practical at first. The researchers wanted to use them as a way to detect water pollution. If the water was contaminated, the fish would change color. But as often happens with things that are cool and unusual, people started getting more interested in these things as potential pets. And by 2003, glowfish were available for sale in the United States, and they quickly became a novelty item. But their release raised some ethical questions. Some people thought it was just fun, but others were uncomfortable with the fact that these were pets that were cooked up in a lab. Plus, there were worries about what might happen if these fish were released into the wild, where they could potentially disrupt ecosystems. Glowfish are legal to sell in many places, but they are banned or restricted in others. At the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota, scientists injected human stem cells into pig fetuses. What they ended up creating was something that could be described as the first pigman, or a pig with human traits. The goal of the experiment was to study how human and pig cells would interact when fused together, because why not, I guess. What they discovered was pretty wild. Some cells kept their separation, so in the pig's body, there were areas with just human cells and others with just pig cells. But other times, the cells actually fused together and formed a brand new type of DNA that no one had ever seen before. So on the outside, it was a regular pig, but on the inside, it was something much more complicated. An animal with half human, half pig cells throughout its body. The most interesting part was the BLOOD, which was a hybrid of human and pig, and this was a completely new type of BLOOD that had never existed before. Scientists were able to confirm that this was the first time such an experiment had ever been done. Now this one's pretty mind-blowing. For a long time, scientists have been piecing together how dinosaurs evolved into modern birds. And in 2016, a team of researchers in Chile set out to watch this evolution in real time by experimenting with chicken embryos. Their goal was to look at how the leg bones of birds have changed over time and how they connect to their dinosaur ancestors. Dinosaurs, like the ones we see in fossils, had two long bones in their lower legs, the fibula and tibia, which ran parallel to one another. Over millions of years, those bones evolved. When it came to modern birds, the fibula became much shorter and developed a splinter-like end, while the tibia became the dominant bone in the leg. Now the researchers wanted to see if they could make chicken embryos grow that older dinosaur-like leg. So they took a gene that plays a role in this leg development, the IHH gene, and suppressed it in the embryos. And the chicken embryos developed leg bones that looked a lot more like dinosaur legs, with both bones being of similar length and reaching down to the ankle. These dino chickens didn't survive long enough to hatch, but this was the first time scientists could directly observe how bird legs evolved from dinosaur legs in living creatures. Before this experiment, it was just all speculation from fossils. Back in 2018, researchers produced sheep-human embryos. They wanted to see if they could grow organs inside these engineered animals. The end goal is to have body parts that could one day be used for organ donations. Scientists introduced human stem cells into sheep embryos, and while the embryos were mostly sheep, a small fraction, less than 1%, contained human cells. Stem cell biologist Hiro Nakauchi from Stanford University said, "The contribution of human cells so far is very small. It's nothing like a pig with a human face or human brain." And yeah, it was not that, fortunately. Yeah, not a huge percentage here, but the fact that they were able to create sheep embryos with even a small fraction of human DNA is pretty wild. The sheep embryos were destroyed after 28 days, so no sheep-human hybrids were actually born, but the experiment showed that creating organs inside animals with human DNA could be a possible solution to the growing need for organ donors. Oh, Florida, the state has enough wild stuff to worry about than, super snakes, but hybrid pythons are a real problem in Florida. These snakes are massive. Some could grow up to 23 feet long and weigh nearly 200 pounds. Originally, a lot of these snakes were exotic pets, but over time, a lot of them were released into the wild, and by the late 80s, the Burmese pythons had grown into a pretty sizable population in Florida and became a massive problem for the ecosystem. But even worse, researchers studying the pythons in 2018 found something pretty unsettling. Out of 426 snakes they sampled, 13 were hybrids. These hybrids were a mix of Burmese pythons and another species, the Indian python, which had also been released by pet owners. The two species hadn't just recently mixed, they'd been interbreeding for a long time before researchers discovered them. The Indian python is smaller but quicker than the Burmese python, and this combination makes them tougher and more adaptable. In 2009, researchers in Russia and Belarus created genetically modified goats that could produce human breast milk. It wasn't exactly pure human milk, but it was close. It contained 60% of the proteins that make up human milk. milk. Not long after, a team in China took things even further and created a whole herd of 300 cows that could also produce human milk. The idea was to be able to harvest human milk on a large scale, mass produce it, and then sell it in stores. I mean, they figured people would not only want to buy human milk, but human milk that came out of a genetically modified farm animal. The Chinese team originally planned to have their milk in stores by 2014, but the idea didn't exactly catch on as they'd hoped, and the plan got delayed. Back in 1996, a group of scientists at Harvard, led by Joseph and Charles Vacanti, created what became known as the Vacanti mouse. This mouse had a human-shaped ear growing right on its back. Now, this wasn't some weird mutation, it was a planned experiment. They took cow cartilage cells, placed them into a mold shaped like an ear, and then implanted it under the mouse's skin. The ear-shaped mold helped guide the cartilage into the desired shape, and as time passed, the cartilage naturally grew into that shape. The goal was to see if they could create artificial ears on mice and then graft them onto humans. The mouse used was what's called a nude mouse, an immunocompromised species that doesn't reject foreign tissue, so it was perfect for this kind of work. In an interview with Newsweek, Joseph Vacanti joked the mouse had the ear removed and then lived out a happy, normal life, which wasn't true. Lab animals are typically euthanized after experiments, and the original paper mentioned the mice after sacrifice, a term used to describe when animals are killed post-experiment. Ilya Ivanov was a Soviet biologist in the early 20th century who became infamous for his attempt to create a human-ape hybrid. Back in 1910, Ivanov gave a talk about the possibility of creating a human-ape hybrid by using artificial insemination. Then, in the 1920s, he took his theories to French Guiana, where he carried out a series of experiments. He tried inseminating female chimpanzees with human genetic material, but this was unsuccessful. After that, he went back to the Soviet Union and started trying to organize similar experiments, only this time he'd flipped them around, injecting ape genetic material into human volunteers. These plans were thankfully interrupted when the last of his orangutans died. Ivanov's work wasn't just controversial, it was downright disturbing to many, and it led to his eventual arrest and exile. Just this year, scientists at the University of Tokyo managed to combine chloroplasts, which are green energy-producing cells found in plants, with animal cells. The idea here was to give animal cells the ability to create energy from sunlight, a process called photosynthesis, just like plants do. For years, scientists had tried to mix chloroplasts with animal cells, but the animal cells would just digest the chloroplasts within a few hours. That was until the Tokyo team used a specific type of algae called this thing here. But this specific algae could stay active in animal cells. They inserted these chloroplasts into Chinese hamster cells, and to their surprise, the chloroplasts didn't just survive, they kept performing photosynthesis for up to 2 days. The hamster cells even grew faster than usual. Looked like the chloroplasts were giving them some extra energy. Researchers still aren't sure exactly how the chloroplasts and the hamster's mitochondria interact, but they're working on it. And these plantable cells could possibly help us find new ways to create tissues or even new forms of energy. In 2019, reports came out about a team of researchers from the Salk Institute in the United States who'd successfully created the first human-monkey chimera. Led by Professor Juan Carlos Psua Belmont, the team had already produced embryos with small amounts of human cells in pigs and sheep, but this time they went a step further, working with monkeys. The idea was similar to their previous work, to create chimeras that might one day be used to grow human organs that could be used for life-saving transplants. These human-monkey chimeras were reportedly only allowed to develop for a few weeks though. The process was carefully monitored and stopped before any of the embryos developed a nervous system or organs, which could raise more serious ethical concerns. These chimeras were also created in China to avoid legal restrictions in other countries. The difference in evolutionary distance between humans and monkeys is much wider than between humans and chimpanzees, but it still opens up the possibility of growing organs for transplants. The chances are slim though that human-monkey hybrids could be brought to full term because of the vast amounts of genetic differences between the species.
In our number 10 spot, we have Vladimir Demikov. Vladimir is a scientist from the Soviet Union that tried to create a two-headed dog. not making this up. Not in the regular crossbreeding way that you may assume. He literally amputated the body of one of the dogs and attached it to the other. This honestly makes me sick to talk about. The dogs only lasted 4 days before passing away, and guess what? He did it again. He did it again. The next experiment ended up with 2 dogs living for about a month. But guess what? He literally had no purpose for these experiments. Just the ego satisfaction of being able to say that he did it. Well, thankfully he didn't, because he doesn't deserve any satisfaction or praise. Just gross. In our number 9 spot, we have Paracelsus. Paracelsus is known for being a Swiss physician, scientist, and alchemist in the 1500s during the Renaissance. He didn't necessarily experiment with crossbreeding humans with animals, but he did experiment with making humans tiny and ginormous. Also, he was seemingly evil/insane, so I just wanted to put him on this list. Paracelsus was convinced he could grow giants and tiny humans by growing them from a jar of Yep. Apparently he would keep the jar in a warm place and feed the creatures blood to make them grow. I can just see him sprinkling in some blood into that jar. Apparently he was quite successful and managed to grow tiny humans, but allegedly the small creatures turned on him and ran away. Naturally. They were said to be a foot high. In our number 8 spot, we have Irving Wiseman. Irving Wiseman was working at Stanford University as a researcher when he was given permission to inject a mouse with human brain cells. They just wanted to see what would happen. They were instructed to stop the experiment once the human-like behaviors got to a specific point, like improved memory or problem solving, because then they'll have a pinky in the brain sitch, and the concept of that only sounds good in the cartoon world. I'm not ready for a mouse world takeover anytime soon. In our number 7 spot, we have Gordon Gallup and his team of scientists. Okay, so not saying Gordon Gallup is the evil scientist, but more that all of the scientists that consented to do this in the first place may have been operating from an evil frequency. Or perhaps they were just doing what they were told because it's their job, because let's be real, the real powerful people that make the decisions are the ones funding such projects as these. But since I have no idea who funded this, as that would probably take too much digging that I don't have time for, and it will probably just lead us to the US government, we're going to just call this spot Gordon Gallup and his team of scientists. Gordon Gallup was once one of the leading experts in evolutionary psychology, and he worked with a team of scientists in the 1920s on interbreeding humans with chimpanzees. He leaked to the press that they were actually successful. The experiment was conducted at the Orange Park Laboratory in Florida. Everyone proceeds to Google the financial backers there. This is where a female chimpanzee was inseminated with human. The animal not only became pregnant, but then proceeded to give birth to a living being, a human Z. But get this, they did not allow the human Z to live. After all of that, it was euthanized. What the heck, man? Potentially harmed this animal by impregnating it only to kill its baby cub. My inner future mama bear is poking through, and I don't like this. In our number 6 spot, we have another group of scientists, the Belgian scientists. It really is so hard to name just one scientist responsible, because it really does take a village to raise a child, and in this case, to create a mutant cow. Yes, a team of Belgian scientists started back in the 1800s to breed native cattle with short-horn cattle, and over time they only selected the biggest and strongest, and eventually that led them to creating the Belgian super cow. A ginormous cow that literally looks like it's on steroids, and I'm kinda afraid of it. I'm very afraid of it. It is unclear why these experiments were being done. I can only assume for more meat. So I guess we can't call these scientists evil per se without a justified reason, but hopefully they have a good one, because otherwise, leave those cows alone. In our number 5 spot, we have Juan Carlos Belmonte. Juan is a biologist at the Salk Institute in California that has been working with other scientists and researchers in China on creating a human-animal chimera. Basically, a monkey embryo will be given human cells to create this. Now, before you get upset and say, What for? I think this may arguably be the best reason for doing this kind of experiment. The reason this is being done is to see if animals can possess organs such as livers and kidneys that are entirely human and can be used in the future as organs for transplants. As we do have a transplant shortage around the world, coming up with a solution to this is vital. Apparently, every 10 minutes a new person is added to the waiting list for an organ transplant. So at this point, it is unclear as to whether the experiment has been completely successful, but I'm sure we'll know in the upcoming years. In our number 4 spot, we have Dr. Karl Klauberg. This guy is truly very evil. He was a doctor that would work in the infamous monstrous camps that I cannot name due to YouTube violation reasons, so please catch my drift. The monstrous camps during World War II, specifically the Poland camp. Apparently, originally he was interested in sterilizing all of the women of the camp, and eventually his interests expanded. He was allowed to experiment on thousands, but only 700 survived. He also artificially inseminated prisoners through a variety of methods and tormented his victims by claiming to have injected animal sperm into their womb to create a monster. There are no reports that confirm this to be 100% true, as well as there are no reports of the after effects of this, so we have to conclude that this horrible, unconsented experiment was thankfully a failure. Just pure evil.
Imagine running an experiment that could, in theory, swallow the planet. That is exactly the fear that erupted when CERN scientists announced that the Large Hadron Collider might produce miniature black holes. The idea was not science fiction. Some theoretical models suggested that smashing protons together at high enough energy could create tiny black holes that immediately evaporate. Physicists reassured the public that these holes would vanish instantly, but what if just one did not? In 2008, lawsuits were actually filed in European courts to stop CERN from turning on the collider, arguing that the risk, no matter how small, was unacceptable. Although the courts dismissed the cases, the idea that Earth's most advanced lab could create black holes terrified the public and made even experts uneasy. One of the scariest theories connected to CERN involves strange matter, sometimes called strangelets. This is a hypothetical type of matter so stable that if it ever touched regular matter, it could convert everything around it into strange matter too. Think of it like a cosmic infection that could spread across the planet. In the 1990s, similar fears surrounded the relativistic Heavy Ion Collider in the US, but the Large Hadron Collider at CERN revived the debate. Some theorists warned that colliding heavy ions could create strangelets capable of devouring Earth from the inside out. While no strangelets have ever been found, the possibility still lingers in theoretical physics. Even if the chances are astronomically small, the concept of a runaway particle that eats the planet was enough to terrify both the public and some of the scientists involved. Few substances are scarier than antimatter. At CERN, researchers at the Antiproton Decelerator facility have been producing and trapping atoms of antihydrogen, the antimatter version of regular hydrogen. Antimatter is fascinating, but it is also very volatile. When matter and antimatter meet, they annihilate in a burst of pure energy. Just 1 gram of antimatter could produce an explosion equivalent to a nuclear bomb. The amounts at CERN are microscopic, far too small to cause harm, but still the fact that scientists are deliberately making and storing one of the most dangerous substances in the universe raises some eyebrows. In 2012, CERN trapped antihydrogen atoms for 1,000 seconds, a record at the time, pushing closer to being able to study it in detail. But even the tiniest containment failure could spell disaster. That reality makes antimatter one of the most forbidden feeling experiments happening at CERN. In 2011, CERN made an announcement that shook the entire world of physics. Neutrinos, ghostly particles that pass through matter almost undetected, appear to be traveling faster than light. If true, this would have broken Einstein's theory of relativity and forced a rewrite of modern physics. For months, scientists double-checked their data, terrified of what this meant. If particles could outrun light, causality itself, the principle that cause comes before effect, would break down. It would mean that time travel, paradoxes, and physics as we know it were all collapsing. Eventually, CERN discovered the anomaly was caused by a loose fiber optic cable, but for those few months, the world of science stared into the abyss of rewriting everything we thought we knew about reality, and even the physicists admitted that that was kinda terrifying. In 2016, a video surfaced online showing what looked like a mock human sacrifice in the courtyard of CERN, right in front of the statue of Shiva, the destroyer. A gift from India, symbolizing creation and destruction, the footage sparked immediate panic. People around the world believed CERN was not just doing science, but performing occult rituals tied to its experiments. CERN quickly responded, saying the video was a prank staged by individuals with unauthorized access, but still, the symbolism of a sacrifice in front of a statue of Shiva, combined with CERN's mission of smashing particles to recreate conditions from the Big Bang, sent conspiracy theories into overdrive. Even though CERN dismissed it, the association of occult practices with high-energy experiments left many people disturbed and made some physicists uncomfortable with the public's perception of their work. CERN is not only smashing particles to discover new ones, some experiments are actively searching for signs of extra dimensions beyond the ones we live in. One proposal suggested that collisions at the LHC could briefly open micro wormholes or gateways to higher dimensions. The idea terrified the public and fascinated scientists. If true, it could explain mysteries like dark matter, but critics worried about what could come through those openings, or what might leak out. In 2008, CERN even published a safety report directly addressing public fears about extra dimensions, black holes, and vacuum decay. While the official word was that the LHC was safe, the very need for such a report shows how uneasy people, including some experts, felt about the implications of these experiments. Speaking of vacuum decay, perhaps the most terrifying possibility ever connected to CERN is that exact idea. In physics, our universe exists in what is called a false vacuum, a very delicate state that could, in theory, collapse to a more stable one. If that collapse started, it would spread at the speed of light, destroying everything in its path. Some theorists worried that high-energy collisions at CERN could trigger this process. Although later studies concluded it was nearly impossible, the fact remains that LHC reaches energy levels never before achieved by humans. When you are running experiments that could theoretically erase the universe, even the smallest chance is enough to terrify scientists. When CERN announced the hunt for the Higgs boson, nicknamed the God particle, the media frenzy made it sound apocalyptic. Headlines claimed CERN might destroy the universe by creating something unnatural. Some even linked the Higgs boson to doomsday prophecies. In July 2012, CERN confirmed the discovery of the Higgs boson, and the world did not end. But behind the celebration was real unease. Peter Higgs himself had warned that high-energy physics could unleash unexpected consequences. The Higgs field gives mass to particles, so tampering with it sounds like tampering with the very foundation of existence. Even though the discovery was safe, the panic it triggered shows how quickly CERN's experiments can cross from groundbreaking to absolutely terrifying. CERN is not just dangerous because of what it discovers, but also because of the scale of its operation. The Large Hadron Collider consumes around 1.3 terawatt hours of electricity per year, about the same as a small city. In 2015, CERN had to shut down experiments because Switzerland simply did not not have enough power during the winter. The sheer energy being fed into the collider raised fears of unintended side effects. Could the massive electromagnetic fields generated by the collider interact with Earth's natural systems? Some conspiracy theorists even claimed that strange weather and earthquakes were linked to CERN powering up. While scientists dismissed these claims, the fact that one machine can drink as much electricity as a city makes it feel like an experiment far too powerful for humans to control. One of the strangest incidents linked to CERN happened in 2009 when the collider suddenly failed. Engineers discovered the cause. A piece of bread had fallen into outdoor machinery, possibly dropped by a bird. The malfunction was serious enough to shut down operations temporarily, but what made the story eerie was the timing. Some theorists speculated that it was not just an accident, but a kind of sabotage from the future. They argued that nature, or even time itself, was trying to prevent CERN from making dangerous discoveries like the Higgs boson. While most physicists laughed it off, others admitted the coincidence was kind of unsettling. The idea that the universe might be actively fighting against CERN's experiments sounds absurd, but it is exactly the kind of story that keeps the public, and even some experts, uneasy about what goes on underground.
Back in 1942, the British government quietly bought Gruinard Island off the coast of Scotland and turned it into a biological weapons testing site. The mission was to see if anthrax could be weaponized. Scientists from Porton-Down, Britain's secretive chemical warfare lab, loaded explosives with anthrax spores and dropped them on the island, wiping out flocks of sheep. Well, the spores stuck around. Anthrax clings to soil for decades, and Gruinard was so contaminated that the government sealed it off for nearly 50 years. It was often referred to as Anthrax Island. Nobody lived there after the test, and for decades there were warning signs everywhere. But then in 1986, the British government finally tried to clean it up, spraying 280 tons of formaldehyde and digging out the worst of the topsoil. In 1990, a junior defense minister even went on TV, picking up a handful of dirt to prove that it was safe again. But nobody was all that enthusiastic about coming back to the place, and the island is still empty to this day. Kantubek was a tiny Soviet town in Vozrozhdenia Island in what's now Uzbekistan. About 1,500 people lived there. They were mostly scientists and their families who worked at Aralsk-7, a massive biological weapons lab in the middle of the island. This place wasn't just big, it was the biggest bioweapons testing site on the planet during the Cold War. But for all that size, the safety standards were a total joke. In 1971, a smallpox test went wrong, 10 people got infected, 3 died, and it almost caused a global outbreak. That alone should have been enough to shut it all down, but it didn't. A year later, 2 fishermen were found dead. They'd been exposed to the bubonic plague, again from the lab, and then a whole bunch of animals started dying off. Fishermen were pulling up nets of dead fish. Not long after, 50,000 antelopes suddenly dropped dead. Meanwhile, Kentubek was being used to dump anthrax waste. The lab was finally shut down in 1991, after the Soviet Union fell. And then in 2002, the US stepped in and helped fund a cleanup to help whatever was left on the island from falling into the wrong hands. Even after all that cleaning though, this island is still very dangerous. Only a few expeditions have been allowed since then, and anyone going in wears full hazmat gear and takes antibiotics just in case. In northeast Kazakhstan, there's a test site called Semipalatinsk, better known as the Polygon. It was the Soviet Union's main nuclear testing zone from 1949 to 1989. And over those 40 years, the Soviets detonated 456 nuclear explosives here. Some were in the air, others were underground. The first Soviet atomic bomb, codenamed First Lightning, was tested here in 1949. The explosions were so massive they left deep craters and cracked the earth open for miles. And at the center of it all, though, was a town, Kurchatov, built to house scientists, engineers, and military workers. It was a secret city, totally off limits to outsiders. But the thing is, nearby villages were often exposed to radiation as well. Locals weren't told what was happening, they just got sick. Hair loss, birth defects, cancer. Some estimates say around 1.5 million people were affected. After the USSR collapsed in 1991, the site was shut down and Kurchatov started to empty out. Today, most of the surrounding area is abandoned. In the late 50s, the US Army decided that it would be a good idea to build a full-on underground base in the middle of the Greenland ice sheet. They called it Camp Century. On paper, it was just a research station to test how people could survive in extreme cold, but in reality, it was part of something called Project Iceworm, which was a secret plan to hide hundreds of nuclear missiles under the ice, aimed at the Soviet Union. They built 21 tunnels into the glacier, added sleeping quarters, a kitchen, there was even a movie theater, and they powered it all with a portable nuclear reactor. But the plan didn't last. It turns out glaciers have a tendency to move, so the ice started shifting and crushing the tunnels. The reactor had to be removed, and by 1967 the camp was shut down and left behind. Most of it is still buried under the ice, along with leftover fuel, chemicals, and some radioactive waste. When they built it, they figured it would stay frozen forever, but now that ice is starting to melt. So yeah, there's a half-buried nuclear base under Greenland and nobody's totally sure what kind of mess is sitting under there. Ross Island sits in the Bay of Bengal, just off the coast of India. Back in the 1800s, the British turned it into a prison colony for Indian rebels. They forced prisoners to clear the land and build government buildings, churches, and a fancy British clubhouse. And around the 1870s, doctors started using the inmates for medical experiments, mainly testing out treatments for malaria. They gave people large doses of medication, but the side effects were brutal. There were stories that some of the prisoners were so sick and desperate, there were cases of them doing awful things just so they could be executed. Things got that bad. The island was still active during World War II until a massive earthquake hit in 1941. Then the Japanese invaded and the British abandoned the place. After the war, it was left to rot. Now it's completely overgrown. Jungle has taken back almost everything. It's open to tourists, but nobody lives there anymore. Skrundel 1 was a Soviet secret town in Latvia built during the Cold War to support a massive radar station used for early warning against missile attacks. It wasn't on any maps, and unless you had military clearance, you were not getting in. The radar setup was part of a system that tracked launches across Europe. Soldiers, radar operators, and their families lived here. There were around 5,000 people at one point. Once Latvia regained independence in 1991, Russia kept operating the site for a few more years until the deal ran out in 1998. When they left, they didn't take much with them. They blew up one of the radar towers and walked away. The rest of the town was just abandoned. Today the place is a proper ghost town. Windows are busted out, classrooms are empty, the old apartment blocks are covered in moss and graffiti. It's popular with urban explorers, but officially it's closed to the public. Latvia tried auctioning off the land a few times, but nothing stuck. In 1928, Henry Ford bought a huge piece of land in the Amazon rainforest and decided to build his own town. He called it Fordlandia. I am not kidding. The plan was to grow rubber for his car factories, but instead of just planting trees, he built a full American-style town. There were white picket fences, a movie theater, golf course, a church. It looked like something straight out of Michigan, but dropped into the middle of the jungle. Very odd. The problem was Ford also had no clue how to grow rubber in the Amazon, and he didn't ask anyone who could. He planted the trees too close together, they got wiped out by fungus and bugs. On top of that, he enforced all these weird rules on people, like they had to dress a certain way, i.e. good old-fashioned American. There was no dancing allowed, definitely no unions. The workers had enough, and eventually they rioted. By 1934, the whole thing had basically fallen apart, and the place was left behind. In the end, it cost him millions, and the rubber output was almost nothing. Pyramiden was a Soviet mining town on a remote Arctic island in Norway. The Soviets bought it from Sweden in 1927. They built a full town from scratch here, with a school, hospital, gym, greenhouse, a music hall. By the 70s, about 1,000 people lived there. It had a hospital, a school, indoor pool, a Lenin statue. Not John, Vladimir Lenin, But in 1998, the mining company shut everything down. One day the workers left and they never came back. The buildings were just left as is. Books still sit on library shelves, children's toys are scattered across classroom floors. There's a cafeteria where the plates and trays were never cleared. Russia still technically owns the land, and today there's a tiny skeleton crew that stays in the summer to maintain things. They do guided tours here, but it's not a functioning town anymore. In the 50s and 60s, Fort Detrick in Maryland was ground zero for two of the US government's creepiest science projects. From 1943 onward, the Army's biological warfare labs experimented with anthrax, botulism, Ebola, the list goes on. Then the CIA launched MKUltra here, a secret mind control program that dosed people with LSD, electroshock, sensory deprivation, and hypnosis, sometimes all at once. The goal is to force confessions or turn people into double agents. From 1954 to 1973, Fort Detrick also ran Operation Whitecoat, a biodefense research program where volunteers, who were mostly conscientious objectors, agreed to get exposed to things like rabbit fever and Q fever to help develop vaccines. It didn't involve kidnapping or LSD, but some volunteers went on to develop pretty severe health issues later on. Head out to the tip of Long Island and you'll find Camp Hero, a big radar station built in 1942 and active until 1982. Today it's a park, but there's a spooky legend attached to the place, the Montauk Project. According to Preston Nichols, who was a former engineer who wrote about it, the government was running secret experiments under the base starting in the late 60s, and they were pretty strange. He claimed there were underground labs with a device called the Montauk Chair that boosted psychic abilities, and that there were tests involving time travel, mind control, and portals to other dimensions. There are also conspiracies about youngsters having been kidnapped for these experiments. Obviously, Camp Hero became a big inspiration for Stranger Things.
We are now at our fifth and halfway mark with the farm cattle. Back in the 1990s, farmers in India were led to believe that if they crossbred their cattle, then they would be able to create cattle that would produce more milk. So they were like, hell yeah, more milk equals more money. Sure, let's do it. So they ended up crossing different breeds of bulls together and with cows. But this had huge consequences for the farmers. In the end, they created cattle that would produce more milk, but needed to be fed more and needed higher quality food, or else it wouldn't produce milk at all. Also, they were more prone to disease, so their vet bills were high. In the end, the cons outweighed the pros. They had to learn this the hard way. Moving on to number 4, we have Hiromitsu Nakochi. Hiromitsu Nakochi is a stem cell biologist from Tokyo. He is determined to use animals to produce human cells or organs. Basically, he hopes to grow human cells in mice and rats and then transplant those embryos into bigger surrogate animals like sheep or pigs. Here's the thing, he's got restrictions. If while conducting the experiments the rats or any animal starts to become more human-like, then they have to stop the experiments on them. It's part of the agreement he has with the government. They don't want humanized animals coming into existence, and neither do I. Moving on to number 3, we have the pig embryos. So in all parts of these series, we talked about how scientists like to use pigs for their experiments. Well, here's another group of researchers running tests on pigs. Scientists are currently working on growing kidneys in pigs. This team is collecting small samples of human blood or skin, and then the cells are separated, cultured, and then treated with different drugs. Next, the technician selects a pig embryo that was altered so that it lacks the gene that it would need to grow its own kidneys. So then the human cells were injected into it so it would grow human kidneys instead. Their hope is that when the pigs grow, they can then remove the human kidneys and then transplant it into the recipient's bodies. In fact, in the US alone, around 20 people die every day waiting for transplants, so this could help them. In our second spot, we have monkey-human embryos. I'm telling you, scientists are running too many experiments on monkeys and chimps, and I'm not fond of the idea of having monkeys and humans crossing, you know, hello, Planet of the Apes, no thank you. Anyways, an international team of scientists introduced human stem cells into monkey embryos and maintained these embryos in culture. Some of the embryos lived for up to 19 days, but only a small minority of the ones that had human cells in them did actually survive. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the growler bear. And honestly, I just like saying its name. Like, it sounds funny. Like Growler. I love it. Anyways, this is a cross between a polar bear and a brown grizzly bear. I kid you not, sometimes they call it the Pizzly bear, but it sounds like piss, so let's just stick with Growler. Now, here's the thing. The reason why these bears are mating is actually really sad. Because of climate change, polar bears have less and less partners to mate with. So out of desperation, they're mating with grizzly bears. It's really sad. It's believed that the first Growler bear was discovered in 2006. On April 16th, 2006, a hunter named Jim Martle was out hunting when he captured a Growler bear. At first, he thought it was just a polar bear, but officials took a look at it and noticed that it had strange features. Later, it was determined that it was a Growler bear. Starting off this countdown, we have the Growler bear. The Growler bear, or the Pizzly bear, is a cross between a polar bear and a brown grizzly bear. This actually happened naturally in the wild, which is kind of hard to believe. Basically, because of climate change destroying the bears' habitats, they started breeding with each other out of desperation, which is actually pretty sad. It's believed that the first Growler bear was discovered in 2006. On April 16th, 2006, a hunter named Jim Martell was out hunting when he captured a Growler bear. At first, he thought it was just a polar bear, but officials took a look at it and noticed it had strange features. Later, it was determined to be a Growler bear. Or Pizzly bear. It's really funny to say. In our 9th spot, we have a Zorse. Any guesses as to what this animal is mixed with? Well, it's a mix between a zebra and a horse. Or sometimes a donkey too. Other people refer to them as zebula, or zebrule, or a zebra mule. These animals were created after crossbreeding a male zebra with a female horse. The offspring look more like a horse than a zebra, but they still got the identifying stripes. The first Zorse was created during the 19th century by Charles Darwin. Now they are still around to this day, but they are extremely rare. This is because Zorses are infertile or sterile. They can't reproduce on their own. So the only way to get more of these bad boys is to get someone to crossbreed them themselves. Moving on to number 8, we have the Jaglion, or Jaglion, I don't know. It's a kind of a weird name, not gonna lie, but this animal is a cross between a jaguar and a lion. And these are actually naturally born. The first Jaglion was unintentionally bred. It happened when a lion and a jaguar coexisted in the same zoo together. They were raised together and, one thing led to another and boom, baby Jaglion. Not gonna lie, these things are beautifully terrifying. They are so unique and cool looking, but also I would never want to come face to face with one. Now, let me share with you a quick little love story between a jaguar named Diablo and a lion named Lola. The two were raised side by side and were inseparable. When Lola got mature, they kept Diablo away from her so that they would never mate. But whenever they were apart, both animals would grow depressed. It got so bad to the point where Lola wouldn't even eat. So they brought them back together, and bada bing bada boom, they had 2 babies together. So cute. Moving on to number 7, we have the human Z. It is so weird and uncomfortable putting this one on the list. But a human Z is a cross between a human and a chimpanzee. Yeah, I already know what you're thinking, but no, not that. Let me explain. Serious attempts have been made throughout the years to cross a chimp with a human. Since we're so similar in a genetic way, people believe that it's possible to do this. Ilya Ivanich Ivanov was the first person to attempt to create a human-chimp hybrid. I believe he started in 1918 and continued these experiences throughout the 1920s. During that time, the Soviet Union was also doing the same experiments. In 2019, rumor has it that a team of researchers from the Salk Institute for Biological Studies in the US successfully completed this. It's kind of creepy, I know. In our 6th spot, we have the Iron Age pig. This is a big, mean old pig, literally. So the Iron Age pig is a cross between a domestic pig and a wild boar. That's just so wrong to me on so many levels. Poor little Miss Piggy. Now, look at this thing. It's huge and looks tough and mean. In fact, they are considered very hostile animals. It's because wild boars are typically more aggressive. That's one of the traits that gets passed along to their offsprings. Now, they get their name because this pig has many characteristics of domesticated animals from the Iron Age period. Hello, there you go, Iron Age pig. It's quite fascinating. These pigs are generally bred in Europe for the sole purpose of selling and eating them. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the green sea slug. As strange as this one is, It's actually really interesting. Honestly though, this has to be the weirdest hybrid on this list. And that's because it's part animal and part plant. Yeah, it's a mix between a sea slug and algae. Yeah, algae. This sea slug was going around eating algae, and eventually the algae became part of its DNA. It's very strange. Soon, green sea slugs were born and contained chlorophyll, just like a plant. In fact, this is the first animal able to make chlorophyll like a plant. They literally can turn solar energy into food. Again, it's quite weird, but also fascinating. In our fourth spot, we have the wholphin, which is really fun and funny to say. So a wholphin is a mix between an Atlantic bottlenose dolphin and a false killer whale. In fact, these are considered very, very rare. The first recorded wholphin was born in 1981 in Tokyo SeaWorld, but sadly, he passed away after 200 days. Now, the first wholphin born in the US was at Sea Life Park in Hawaii in 1985, but she had trouble reproducing. Her baby wholphins sadly passed away. Some say they have seen wholphins out in the wild, but these sightings have never been confirmed. But if you do see one, it's very rare. Coming in at number 3, we have the enviropig. Okay, this one, I take it back. This one is probably the weirdest one on this list. Basically, an enviropig is an environmentally friendly pig. Basically, pigs' excrements are high in phosphorus. This phosphorus then ends up in lakes and rivers and oceans and can cause a boom of algae. So scientists were like, hey, let's just breed a pig with less toxic waste. And that's what they did. Enviropigs are pigs with up to 65% less phosphorus in their excrements. This pig was first created in 1999 at the University of Guelph's farm in Canada. This pig had its phytase gene attached to a piece of mouse DNA. Basically, in the end, it made the pig produce an enzyme to help it better digest plant phosphorus, which is a nutrient in its feed. Voila! From there, enviropigs were born. In our second spot, we have the Belgian super cow. Now, when they said super cow, they weren't joking, because take a load of this cow. It's monstrous. As many of you guys know, cows are my favorite animal, but this one terrifies me. It's massive. Like, look at its muscles. I'm sorry, but no animal should be as ripped as that. So basically, this super cow was created back in the 1800s when Belgian scientists and farmers mixed native cattle with shorthorn cattle. Then over the time, they would select the biggest and strongest offsprings of each variety and get them to breed together. So on and so on, bam, you got this super cow, which is definitely the biggest and strongest. So maybe let's stop doing that because this cow is soon gonna get too big for its own good and like take over the world or something. And in our number 1 spot, we have the human pig hybrid. Yes, this is a real thing. Scientists at the Salk Institute for Biological Sciences in California have created a human-pig hybrid. Now you're probably wondering, why on earth would they do this? Well, they did this in hopes that one day they could grow human organs inside of pigs and other animals instead of waiting for a donor. So in 2017, an embryo was placed in an adult pig for 4 weeks. Then this was taken out and analyzed. And the embryo survived and contained some human cells. Now they're going to figure out if pig embryos can handle enough human cells to create human organs. It's very creepy in my opinion.
Starting our list off at number 10, the turkey fake-out. Okay, this one is pretty hilarious. I have to start off our list here, especially in a dark list about crossbreeding. Come on. Back in the 60s, turkey biologists in Pennsylvania thought, you know what if a male turkey was in a room with a fake turkey? Yeah, a fake female turkey. Would he try and flirt with it? Would he, I am legend, this fake turkey? What would happen? Well, the answer is yes. These male turkeys would try and mate with a fake turkey, which is funny, but by the end of the test, they were really surprised more than anything. They would just have the head of a turkey on a stick, and these dudes still came out like, hey, what's going on? You single? What's up? What's happening? It didn't matter. It was just the head and the rest didn't matter. The sticks chicks over here are catching every turkey's attention, but why? Why don't they care about the body? What's going on? Like biologically, this makes no sense. The scientific conclusion here, yes, there was one, was that the turkey fixates on the head when it comes to finding a mating partner, which is honestly pretty sweet. They're holding eye contact the whole time, even with their bobby weird heads. They're still like, hey, it's just you and me, let's talk. Number 9, the gastric brooding frog. Okay, now we're back. Now, immediately back to business. Crossbreeding and gastric brooding. Okay, we're getting scientific now. I'm a big fan of frogs, except for when they hatch eggs out of their back. We don't like those. Our editors also don't like those clips either. I found out the hard way. I'm like, yeah, insert clip of a frog coming out of other frog's back from 129. They're like, please God, no. So, bless your soul. Give the thumbs up for our editors today. Thumbs up for all of our editors today. We give them horrible, horrible links they have to put together and make into art. These frogs, not so bad. These frogs would swallow their eggs and they would hatch them out of their mouth. Honestly, they're fascinating creatures. And with the recent Lazarus project, scientists are trying to bring the Australian gastric brooding frog back from extinction. So we can see all that again in person. We can see them. Honestly, I think the back stuff's better now that I think about it. A frog coming out of a mouth, ew. It went extinct back in 1983, but scientists have now figured out how to implant dead cells into a fresh egg from an entirely different frog species. Yeah, just zombie frogs, I guess. Zombie frogs that give birth through their mouths. Do we know what we're doing here? Sounds weird when you say it out loud. Amphibians are declining worldwide, so if we can get these guys out of extinction, we're looking good. We're looking better, rather. Number 8, Martha. Look, I like to keep it light, so I have to include my girl Martha on this list. The passenger pigeon, she once flocked over the skies of Canada. This was back in the 19th century. Billions of these bright orange pigeons would paint the skies, and rumor has it, they would fly in flocks so large that it would block out the sun for a short amount of time. Beautiful, could you imagine? Flocks that block. We love it. But only a few decades passed and passenger pigeons are now no more. They're entirely extinct. Sad stuff. The very last passenger pigeon, her name was Martha. She passed away in the Cincinnati Zoo back in 1914. So we took a look at her DNA to see if Martha held any secrets to their extinction, and we found a key. Possibly we could bring Martha back. I don't know why I did that, it's pretty dark. Like a little bird. Wouldn't work at all. They discovered Martha had a low genetic diversity for such a growing population. Natural selection and hunting eliminated arguably the nicest looking pigeon. The last one died in 1914, but in 2019, paleontologists found remains of the pigeon in protected indigenous lands in the Northwest Territories. So now we have hope, right there. They blended passenger pigeon DNA with Archaeopteryx dinosaur DNA. Yeah, we're bringing back pigeons with a touch of dinosaur. I'll say it again. On one hand, yeah, that's great. I'm glad science is allowing us to try again, but look at the pigeons we have now. What's gonna happen to these guys? They're hardcore. Pigeons now will walk onto the subway. They'll ask you what time it is. They don't care. These graceful birds from the 1910s, I don't think they're ready. That's like a Back to the Future, that's like Hot Tub Time Machine type. I'm like, you guys won't get along. Number 7, woolly rhinoceros. Since I mentioned the revival of woolly mammoths in part 1, what better time to mention this hairy beast? The woolly rhino. Okay, I oddly want to pet him, weirdly. Once upon a time, these rhinos were common throughout Europe and Asia. They were all prepared for the cold tundra, hence the fur, the thick blanket of fur. Just like the woolly mammoth, right? They adapt to survive. So no ice age will stop this rhino. Ideally, that was the plan. I mean, it didn't help them out entirely, but it was mostly humans needing food and warmth that led to their extinction. So cut to 14,000 years later, we're trying to apologize. We're trying to make it up to them by bringing them back to life. It's a little hotter now, good luck. The same company responsible for the Mammoth Project is also trying to bring back this hairy boy. I mean, yeah, again, I'm all for science, but if these species died out that long ago, will highways help them? Imagine running into one of these. Number 6. Megatherium. We talked about bringing back woolly rhinos and woolly mammoths, so what other Ice Age cast members can we potentially see on the highway? Perhaps the Megatherium, aka the giant sloth? Why are we doing this? What if this works? We don't want to see this. Sloths used to be a lot bigger than we think, folks. We often laugh at them for being slow and stuff. The movie Ice Age sure didn't help their case, but we learned stuff like the dodo bird. We're bringing them back. Sloths, we're also bringing them back. Of course, the giant ground sloth is closely related to our modern three-toed sloth, but luckily for us, today's sloths aren't the size of an elephant. That would be a horror film if we brought these back. Like, let's just leave normal sloths. We may be able to bring this one back, although they died off thousands of years ago due to DNA samples. Yeah, we got some DNA samples extracted from their hair remains, so the next step now that's waiting for us is to develop a fetus in an artificial womb. That's the hard part, but we're very close. Too close, I'd say. Stop. If you're working on any, Megatherium science projects, just, chill. Just chill out for a bit. Number 5, spider art. For a nice halfway point here, I have to mention NASA's 1995 spider test, which sounds really scary, but it's not that bad, hear me out. When nature meets science, we often get jarring results, be it hybrid animals, clones, you name it. Spiders, as fascinating as they already are, can be even more mysterious, especially when they're exposed to mind-altering illicit substances. Yeah, just some hardcore stuff. NASA wanted to determine the toxicity between said substances and what differences they may look like. Spiders are fascinating. We can literally see how they think and survive. We see it up close when we walk through them and go, ew, gross, but we never see them like this, right? Caffeinated behavior is all over the place. It doesn't look like a normal spider at all, but with hallucinogens, it's the same shape, but it's almost missing steps, right? Little differences between all these tests. I don't think any animal should have coffee, period. I don't think an espresso goes well with any bug. Yeah, trust me. I'm all jacked up on coffee right now. The moa. This New Zealand bird went extinct about 600 years ago, and I'm pretty glad. They're absolutely terrifying. They were flightless birds, massive, hence the flightlessness, and archaeologists first discovered a fossil in a cave. Its flesh and everything was still attached. It looked something out of a horror movie. It was terrible. These ancient birds would reach around 5 or 6 feet tall, and when you think of dinosaurs, you probably think, oh, that's quite petite. No, this is horrible. The birds stopped flying right after these dinosaurs went extinct. According to biologist Matthew Phillips from the Australian National University in Canberra, these birds safely roamed the land after they didn't need to make, daring dino escapes. So they got fat, they walked around, they stopped flying, and they just retired. Then they would hang out in caves and just eat good. Phillips says this is an advantage when it came to birds in evolution because wings, big or small, kill energy. So it might seem a little depressing to watch a creature, lose the ability to fly, but it's because they're eating better, right? I would rather eat really well than fly, to be honest. I can't even fly now, and I'm like, I'd still rather just eat a lot. Again, why are we mixing DNA of a dinosaur with new birds? This is where we turn into Jurassic Park. Any minute. Next year I'll be like, hey, top 10 animals that made the test and now we're screwed. Number 3, the Steller sea cow. Stellar indeed, yeah, the Steller sea cow was named after George Wilhelm Steller, who discovered this massive creature back in the mid-1700s during the Vitus Bering's Great Northern Expedition. They found her right after the crew became shipwrecked. What a lovely little surprise to an otherwise horrible situation. They were all over the place 2 million years ago. They were no match for humans at all. They only swam around a meter deep, and once humans came into the picture much later, they were very easy to hunt. They were fat little blubber balls that would sit in shallow water. I mean, come on. George Steller commented that the animals had an uncommon love for their families, which made it even easier to hunt. Considering the 1-year gestation period, the species couldn't reproduce fast enough to keep up with our hunting. But with this list, we have a little hope, right? That's why I'm here. Hi, now you're sad. I'm here to make your day a little happier. Scientists were able to sequence the genome, which means that we may see these creatures very soon, one day. Hopefully soon. The answer may lie in the DNA of a dugong. Yeah, dugongs are the cow of the sea, so what better relative to kind of pick apart and maybe crossbreed. Number 2, the mouse with an ear on its back. And we're right back to horrible stuff, okay. If we ever reboot Stuart Little, this guy needs to audition, he's killing it. The mouse with a human ear, folks. This is like the world's greatest mouse spy. This is horrible. What are we looking at here? Why did someone do this? Well, back in 1997, this mouse became the test subject to determine if scientists could grow cartilage using chondrocytes, aka cells from a cow. Well, it worked, and we're still talking about it, obviously, because it's the weirdest thing I've ever looked at. Yeah, Joseph began designing human organs, and this was during a shortage where human organs wasn't just like, common, easy thing to get. He wasn't just bored and, started making ears. He was changing the medical game, okay? And little did he know he was about to change the science game as well. He constructed an ear, a fake ear, then told his brother Chuck and his partner Bob not to bring up the fact that he attached said ear to a mouse. But Chuck, obviously, because of what happened, he spilled the beans, he told a few friends. But now we all know how cow cartilage can create cells, so little secret became great science. I really want to Q-tip his back. Is that weird? I want to Q-tip the mouse with an ear on its back's back. And finally, number 1, the multi-dog. Okay, crossbreeding experiments from hell. Let's finish on a really messed up one. The multi-dog. This was back in the 50s when a Soviet scientist, Vladimir Demikov, created a multi-headed dog. Time magazine covered it, of course. This is a feat in science. As cruel as it is, of course, this was a big deal. The adult dog had a newborn pup grafted to its neck, so when it grew, it could survive off the blood of the main, bigger dog. the body, for lack of a better term. When observed, the puppy did have its own characteristics. It was playful, it was growling, it would lick people's hand and stuff like that, just as the other dog's characteristics would be, in its own unique way. It's a sad 1950s Soviet animal experiment, so of course the animal didn't survive a long time, but crossbreeding experiments from hell, that's why we're here. This is the note that we're going to end on.
And we're starting off this list with rabbit-human hybrids. Back in 2003, scientists in Shanghai successfully fused human cells with rabbit eggs in a laboratory dish. And the crazy thing was, they survived until they were disposed of and harvested for their stem cells. So it's unclear how long they could have survived and whether the thing would have actually reached past the embryo stage. We could have had a real half-person, half-rabbit monster living amongst us. They'd be about 20 years old now. Not sure why the scientists didn't try this again and actually let the thing live. Maybe it just would have been too freaky. Or maybe they did try it again and there are a whole bunch of rabbit people hiding away somewhere in China just waiting to be unleashed into the world to do God knows what. Imagine how freaky a rabbit person would be though. A mangy, almost hairless rabbit with a human-y kind of face hopping around. Human-y, that's a new word. At our number 9 spot we have the chimpanzee. We're gonna chill in China for a little bit longer here. This apparently happened back in 1967. This story is not 100% verified, but according to 2 scientists in Shenyang, they were able to impregnate a chimpanzee with the seed of a human, which I very much hope done artificially. They were hoping to create a more advanced form of chimpanzee that could hopefully learn to speak, and were even hoping to send it off and do experiments in space. I think the more advanced form of chimpanzee is us. I think that's what we are. But anyway, apparently the chimp did get pregnant, now carrying a human-chimp hybrid in its belly, but the creature was never born as their lab and work was destroyed by revolutionaries and the chimp died while 3 months into its pregnancy. Not sure about this story. On one hand, this all sounds pretty far-fetched, but on the other, as I said, we do share about 98.8% of our DNA with chimps, so stranger things have happened. Number 8, mice with human livers. So this is an interesting case because I'm actually kind of on board with it. It's a great alternative to testing on chimpanzees. I shall explain. In 2010, researchers at the Salk Institute for Biological Studies in California were able to genetically modify a mouse so that it had an almost human liver. The aim of the game here was to create an animal they could test on for diseases that only humans and chimpanzees get. In the past, we've only been able to test stuff like hepatitis B and C and malaria on chimps, so being able to use mice instead, still not ideal, but it might be the best alternative. Basically, the goal is to infect these genetically modified mice with whatever disease they're testing on, and then attempt to treat them. Could make for pretty big strides in the medical field. At number 7, let's take a step away from actual science for a moment and discuss something a little bit more mysterious. The cryptid known as Owlman. I was considering putting the Mothman at this spot, but we've all heard about the Mothman plenty of times before. The first reported account of this terrifying creature dates back to 1976 in the village of Maunan in Cornwall. 2 young girls had encountered the beast, describing what they saw to be an almost man-sized owl with glowing red eyes. It had been seen hovering above the church tower. Since that fateful day, more and more reports began swooping in about this mysterious owl creature, and till this day we still don't know what this thing is or was. Was it just a hoax or possibly a really big owl? Probably, but it could have been a human-owl hybrid, which was the result of some horrendous scientific experimentation. You know, that's also a probability. So now we're going to talk about another mouse-related hybrid. This time it's mice with human brains. Yeah, it turns out we actually got pretty close to making Pinky in the Brain a reality, because I think sometimes scientists just go, why not? Let's just do it. Back in 2014, scientists were able to imbue several lab mice with millions of human brain cells. The mice lived though. After about a year, almost every cell in their brains had been replaced by human ones. Now, my human brain automatically goes to these mice now performing complex math equations and playing checkers with the scientists, but that's not what happened. Turns out their memory just got way better. The way scientists tested this was by playing a certain noise, then they'd send a small electric shock through the mice, and the next time they played whatever that noise was, they took note of how the mice reacted, bracing for the incoming electric shock, and they were able to determine that the memory of these mice was 4 times stronger than that of a normal mouse. At number 5, we have human brain cells in monkeys. So Chinese scientists made headlines recently by successfully adding human brain cells to monkeys. This breakthrough involved injecting human stem cells to monkey embryos, leading to the creation of these kind of chimeric embryos, organisms composed of cells from these 2 different species. The goal here was to gain insight into brain development and disorders like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's diseases by studying how the human cells integrated and interacted with the monkey brains. By looking at how the injected human cells behaved and developed in the monkey brains, they hoped to gain more insight into brain functions and diseases that could be otherwise unattainable through traditional means. But it doesn't take a genius to realize that the creation of animals, especially monkeys with human brain cells, is a pretty unnerving idea. If you've ever seen Planet of the Apes, you know how things could turn out here. Next up, we have reptilians. The presence of reptilian humanoids seeping their way into our society has been a relatively well-known conspiracy theory for years. There are some folks that are just 100% convinced that a number of celebrities and politicians and other powerful members of our society are reptilian creatures in disguise. Folks report their eyes changing briefly, showing their true lizard-like pupils below the surface of their nearly flawless human skin suits, or their smooth skin starting to morph into the scaly-like texture that reptiles are so renowned for. And where are these creatures said to come from? Some say outer space, and some say there are cabals of reptilians living in layers deep beneath the surface of the earth, organizing themselves to enact world domination on the inferior species above, which is us. And at number 3, we have cows with human milk. Back in 2011, Chinese scientists were able to genetically produce a herd of 300 cows able to produce milk that was 80% similar to that of human breast milk. It contained nutrients not found in cow milk that are essential to human beings, and they were hoping to mass produce this hybrid cow human milk, getting it on the shelves of every grocery store. Suffice to say, it never really took off. Now, I don't know how this was accomplished. I am not a scientist, surprisingly, but I do know that this is something I would never drink. This isn't the only case of cows being modified with human genes to make their milk more closer to ours. This same process was also used on goats in Argentina, and this type of milk has been tested on pigs, and apparently they were fine, but I don't know about you. I just get a little pukey at the idea of chugging down milk, even just normal milk, by the way, but genetically modified milk from a lab cow, I'll pass on that one, thank you. And like I said, I'd pass on standard milk too. I just don't think we're supposed to really be consuming the stuff in high quantities like past infancy. But I don't know, there's a lot of debates about that. Number 2, the Loveland frog. Oh boy, do I love the Loveland frog. Yes, we're back in decrypted territory here. I can't help it. This weird and wacky creature is one of the most famous cryptids in the fine state of Ohio. This is not just one cryptid though. It's a group of 3 to 4 foot tall humanoid frog creatures. Now, the legend started gaining steam back in 1955 when a local man claimed to have seen not 1, not 2, but 3 of these froggish beings just hanging out under a bridge. He described them as being hairless, with large mouths, with no lips, with a greenish tint to their skin. They also had a wand-like device that emitted a strange smell of almonds. In 1972, a police officer also claimed to have seen a large frog creature, saying he actually shot at one of them as it leapt across the road. So did someone slip something into that man's drink in 1955? Was he just making it up? Did the cop in 1972 just fire at a very large lizard? Very possible. Or scientists were doing some nefarious frog experiments over there in Ohio. And knowing what I've learned about Ohio over my time spent doing this job, that would not surprise me in the slightest. Coming in at number 1 though, we have pigs with human organs. So this is something that's being continually researched And it's actually pretty interesting and potentially very useful because the purpose of this is to create farm animals that can be harvested for important organs like human hearts and lungs, which could be life-saving for people needing replacements. Not sure if I'd want my new heart coming from a mutated pig monster, but I guess the chips are down. You gotta take what you can get. Japanese scientist Hiromatsu Nakuichi is one of the leading scientists on this project and is operating in the United States to help bring it to reality. They've been able to create hundreds of pig-human embryos, but none of them with the amount of human DNA necessary to accomplish their goals. But their research continues, and I'm confident that one day we'll be able to visit a disgusting pig person farm with fresh new organs we can choose from in order to keep ourselves alive for as long as we want. That's the future that I want. Deep under the ground in southern China, 2,300 feet down to be exact, scientists are getting ready to launch one of the most ambitious physics experiments ever built. A 12-story tall water tank surrounding a giant glowing sphere covered in 43,000 super sensitive light detectors. This thing is called JUNO, short for Jiangmen Underground Neutrino Observatory, and it's built to hunt one of the weirdest particles in the universe, the neutrino. Neutrinos are created by nuclear reactions inside the sun, inside nuclear power plants, even inside the Earth itself. They're everywhere. Trillions of them fly through you every second without you even noticing. What makes neutrinos so strange is they can switch between different types while traveling through space. Scientists still don't know how or why that happens, but figuring it out could unlock secrets about how the universe was built and why matter exists in the first place. JUNO might detect neutrinos from inside the Earth and use them to study what's going on under the crust, which could completely change how we understand earthquakes and plate tectonics. There's even talk about using neutrinos to send messages straight through the planet. China's pushing hard to be the first. At the Baksan Neutrino Observatory in the Caucasus Mountains of Russia, more than a mile underground, scientists have been messing around with a strange mystery of physics, the gallium anomaly. Again, this has to do with neutrinos. They're already strange, but this experiment might be leading to something even stranger, the possible existence of a whole new type of particle called a sterile neutrino. The experiment, called BEST, which stands for Baksan Experiment on Sterile Transitions, used 47 tons of liquid gallium, a silvery metal that melts in your hand, and they blasted it with neutrinos produced by radioactive chromium. The goal was to see how many times the neutrinos would hit the gallium and turn it into a different element, called germanium-71. But when scientists went to count how much germanium-71 was made, the numbers didn't add up. It was about 20 to 24% lower than they'd expected, even though their measurements and predictions were very precise. This is not the first time this has happened. Older experiments saw the same types of results, which is why we have what's referred to as the gallium anomaly. One possible explanation is that some of the neutrinos are vanishing, they're changing into a form that can't be detected, a sterile neutrino. Unlike normal neutrinos, these hypothetical particles wouldn't interact with anything except gravity. That's why some researchers think we might be seeing the effects of new physics that break the current model of how the universe supposedly works. Still, no one's entirely sure what's going on. Either there's a flaw in the experiment that no one's caught yet, or this could be one of the biggest clues that something is missing from the laws of physics as we know them. At Brookhaven National Lab in New York, scientists may have just rewritten part of quantum physics. Using their giant particle smasher, the relativistic heavy ion collider, they came across a new type of quantum entanglement. So if you've never heard of quantum entanglement before, it's a phenomenon where two particles become so connected that changing one will instantly affect the other, no matter how far apart they are. This is very real, and it's been proven over and over again in labs, but normally entanglement only happens between particles that are exactly the same, like two identical photons or electrons, but the Brookhaven team found something totally new. Two completely different particles were entangled. This experiment took place at the relativistic heavy ion collider, where scientists slam gold ions together at nearly the speed of light, but in this case the gold ions didn't even collide, they just passed close by each other. Each ion has a cloud of photons around it, basically particles of light. When the photon cloud from one ion passed the other, it acted like a flash bulb, setting off a super short X-ray type scan of the other ion's nucleus. What's weird is that this scan shouldn't even be possible under regular physics, because there was no physical contact between the ions. Well, the result was that two new particles popped out of nowhere, called pions, one positive and one negative, and they were entangled, somehow linked. According to Zhangbu Zhu, one of the researchers, we measured two outgoing particles and clearly their charges are different. They are different particles, but we see interference patterns that indicate these particles are entangled. End quote. So, in short, this is the first time anyone's seen two different particles become entangled like this, and it could make scientists rethink how entanglement works altogether. Back in the 70s, a Russian physicist named Nikolai Kozyrev started talking about time in a very weird way. He theorized that it was something you could tap into, almost like energy. He believed time had physical properties, that it could be detected directly, which sounds pretty insane, but Kozyrev was a respected astrophysicist, and he did experiments using spinning gyroscopes, pendulums, and these mirrored chambers, now known as Kozyrev mirrors. These were large spiraled aluminum tubes that people would sit inside, and some of them said they had these out-of-body experiences and visions. The KGB supposedly took interest in his work too. The story goes they backed secret studies using these mirrors for everything from psychic research to remote viewing. Some Soviet cosmonauts were even said to have used Kozyrev mirrors in orbit to gather non-local information, which is a fancy way of saying they were trying to see or sense stuff from far away. Pretty bizarre. If you had a shortwave radio in the 70s or 80s, you might have heard a weird tapping sound, like a woodpecker. It may have come from the Duga radar, a massive radar system coming out of the Soviet Union. The thing was so loud and constant that radio operators around the world dubbed it the Russian woodpecker. Officially, Duga was part of a warning system for detecting incoming nuclear missiles, but unofficially, that's where things get strange. Some researchers believe the Soviets were doing more than just listening for nukes. There were rumors that Duga was part of a weather control experiment, or maybe even a Soviet mind control experiment. The theory was that the radar was manipulating the ionosphere, which is the layer of Earth's atmosphere that reflects radio waves. The Duga site is now abandoned, but to this day, no one outside the Russian military fully knows what Duga was really doing. In the Cold War, the US Navy built a massive communication system using extremely low-frequency radio waves to communicate with submarines deep underwater. The original plan, Project Sanguine, proposed burying thousands of miles of cables across Wisconsin to send messages even if nukes hit the power grid. That version got scrapped because there were a lot of people protesting the environmental impact, so a scaled-down system called Project ELF was launched. It operated from 1989 to 2004. Extremely low-frequency radio waves, or ELF waves, could reach submarines hundreds of meters underwater. Officially, these waves only sent coded two-letter messages and couldn't carry voice or data, but around the facilities, weird rumors started to spread. Some locals said animals would get spooked and people would feel suddenly woozy. And there were conspiracy theories about how ELF waves were distorting time and messing with the human mind. Since the early 2000s, governments like the US and China have been pouring money into quantum computing. Instead of using bits like a normal computer, which are either a 0 or a 1, these machines use something called qubits. Qubits can act like both 0 and 1 at the same time, which means quantum computers can run through insane numbers of calculations all at once. This is possible because of quantum physics, specifically superposition and entanglement. The goal is to use this to break encrypted codes and solve problems that would take a normal computer millions of years. But a lot of the experiments going on right now aren't public. Agencies like DARPA, NSA, and China's Ministry of State Security are racing to be the first to get a working, large-scale quantum computer. That kind of machine would give whoever builds it a massive advantage, especially when it comes to spying and warfare. NASA's EagleWorks lab tested a propulsion device called the EM drive that claimed to generate thrust without any fuel. The idea was to bounce microwaves around in a sealed metal chamber and somehow push forward. No exhaust needed. Well, in 2016, the team said they measured a tiny bit of thrust. It was about 1.2 millinewtons for every kilowatt of power, which is super small, but still a big deal if it was real, because it looked like the engine was pushing forward without anything pushing back. That would break break one of the basic rules of physics, Newton's third law. But a lot of other scientists weren't really convinced. They thought the result might have just been a fluke, like a heat or a vibration messing with the sensors. Enter the Dresden University team. They built a much more sensitive test rig to measure the thrust and found that the tiny push NASA saw just might have been the device heating up and tilting ever so slightly. So yeah, it was exciting at first because it looked like a fuel-free engine could exist, but probably doesn't, at least not yet. Back in the early 2000s, Chinese military researchers started working on a new kind of torpedo that didn't move through water, it moved inside a bubble. This thing's called a supercavitating torpedo. The idea is that once it gets going fast enough, it creates a gas bubble around itself so it's not touching water at all. That means almost no drag. Ideally, you could have speeds of up to 230 miles per hour underwater. They were reportedly working on ways to steer it too, and if they pulled it off, it would break the physics of underwater combat. Normally, sound moves way faster than objects in water, but this thing could close the gap before anyone even detects it. And the Philadelphia experiment. It's been talked about in conspiracy circles for decades. As the story goes, in 1943, the US Navy supposedly tried to make the destroyer, USS Eldridge, visible to radar and ended up making it vanish from sight altogether. Some versions even say it teleported from Philadelphia to Norfolk, Virginia in the blink of an eye. The experiment allegedly used intense electromagnetic fields to bend light and warp space-time, basically trying to create a cloaking device way before anyone else ever dreamed of it. Supposedly things got really scary. Crew members reportedly got fused into the ship's metal, others went insane, and some were just never seen again. The story first came about in the 50s when a guy named Carl Allen sent letters claiming he had insider info on the incident. The Navy's always denied the whole thing, of course. Official records don't show any such experiment. But, like always, what do you guys think? Biosphere 2 was set up as a 3-acre capsule to mimic Earth's ecosystems. Rainforest, ocean, desert, and farms. It was all sealed shut on September 26, 1991, with 8 scientists locked in for 2 years. By month 16, oxygen levels had fallen from about 21% to just 14%, roughly the equivalent of living at 13,000 feet. This wasn't good. Headaches, fatigue, insomnia, and mental fog was a daily struggle. One participant, Mark Nelson, couldn't even do simple math. Kind of like me. Scientists from Columbia University, Jeff Severingus and Wallace Broker, later discovered that the soil, packed with peat and compost, had microbes in it that consumed oxygen and produced CO2. But much of it was absorbed by calcium in the concrete walls, locking away CO2 and oxygen in solid form. Add blocked sunlight, poor plant growth, dying bees, and runaway ants, and the ecosystem was clearly out of balance. Even with daily food production that supplied about 83% of their diet, the crew lost an average of 16% body weight during the first 6 months. And things got tense between the scientists too. Factions started to form. Enough that participant Jane Pointer said that living there was, quote, cult-like. By the end of the mission on September 26, 1993, the crew finally came out. Thinner, exhausted, but alive. Suffice to say though, things hadn't gone smoothly. In September of 1950, the US Navy carried out a secret biological warfare test on civilians in San Francisco. They loaded a Navy ship with massive tanks of bacteria and used hoses to spray a cloud of microbes into the air near the coastline. That sounds like something Lex Luthor would do, but the goal was to test how easy it would be to infect a major US city with biological weapons. It still sounds like something Lex Luthor would do. Now, they weren't actually trying to just kill people outright. The bacteria they used was believed to be harmless at the time, but they weren't. After the spraying, hospital staff at Stanford started seeing strange infections. 11 people developed serious urinary tract infections, and one man, Edward Nevin, died after Serratia infected his heart valve. It was the first recorded outbreak of Serratia in the area. The doctors couldn't explain how such a rare bacteria had suddenly shown up. The Navy kept the test a secret until the 70s, when documents were released during a Senate investigation into Cold War experiments. Turned out similar tests had been done in other cities as well. Operation Sea Spray is now one of the most infamous examples of government experiments that went way over the line, which is putting it lightly. Back in the 1940s and 50s, doctors used African clawed frogs for pregnancy tests because they had a weird but useful reaction to pregnant women's urine. Here's how it worked. Urine samples were sent to labs, where technicians would inject a small amount into a female frog's hind leg. Then they put the frog back in its tank and checked the next morning for frog eggs in the water. If the frog had laid eggs, that meant the woman was pregnant. Pregnancy hormone called human chorionic gonadotropin triggered the frog to ovulate. Labs shipped thousands of these frogs all over the world. When the frogs got loose or were released into ponds and streams, things got kind of bad. African clawed frogs are pretty tough and they're invasive. They also carried a deadly fungus which didn't hurt them but killed off native frogs everywhere they spread. This fungus attacks amphibian skin, making it almost impossible for them to regulate water and electrolytes, which often leads to death. So frogs started dying off in places like California and Australia. Some species actually came pretty close to extinction. So eventually they put a stop to these tests. In 1962, scientists at the University of Oklahoma decided to test how LSD affects elephants. They wanted to see if it could trigger what's called the must, which is a natural period when male elephants get more aggressive, unpredictable, and start reproducing more. To do this, they gave an Asian elephant named Tusco an enormous dose, about 3,000 times what a typical human dose would be. Well, within minutes, Tusco collapsed and went into seizures. The team tried to save him with sedatives and antipsychotics, but an hour and 40 minutes later, he died. Scientists later realized the dose was way too high. And some think the sedatives may have made things worse as well. When other researchers gave elephants smaller doses later on, those elephants survived just fine. Obviously though, this was a pretty disgusting, ill-conceived experiment. On October 13, 1947, US military and General Electric teamed up for a pretty insane experiment. They flew into Hurricane King, a massive storm moving out to sea, and dropped a bunch of dry ice into its clouds. They hoped that the dry ice would create ice crystals, collapse the eye wall, and weaken the storm. At first, it looked pretty promising too. The shape and movement of the storm's clouds looked different after they dropped the dry ice into it. But then the hurricane suddenly veered west, made landfall near Savannah, Georgia, and tore through coastal areas with 85-mile-an-hour winds, flooding streets, wrecking homes, and killing at least one person. The public accused the project of causing this disaster, forcing General Electric and the military to pull the plug. It turned out they probably didn't cause the turn, but the experiment left such a bad reputation that projects like this vanished for over a decade. In secret trials during World War II, the US and New Zealand tested whether explosives could trigger tsunamis. Led by engineer Thomas Leach, the project used thousands of small underwater explosions off Auckland's coast, where test blasts formed mini waves. They found that chaining together tons of explosives about 8 kilometers offshore could, at least in theory, create a wave big enough to flood enemy shorelines. They never tested it at full scale, thankfully, but the results showed that it could work. Officials called it a tsunami bomb, and some thought it could be as destructive as the atomic bomb, just without the radiation. There was real military interest in this for a while, but by the time they were getting close to something usable, the US dropped atomic bombs on Japan and this idea got shelved. The project stayed classified until the 90s when declassified papers confirmed that yes, the testing was real and no, it wasn't just some Cold War myth. In May of 1955, the US government dropped 300,000 mosquitoes over Georgia to test how well these bugs could spread and survive after being released from planes. This was part of Operation Big Buzz, and it worked well enough that the government went on to launch even bigger tests called Operation Dropkick, Operation Gridiron, and Operation Mayday, spreading mosquitoes over parts of the South. They wanted to eventually use mosquitoes carrying diseases like malaria or yellow fever as biological weapons to weaken enemies during wartime. Just nuts. Years before this though, during World War II, US officials wanted better malaria treatments, and they needed human test subjects to see how effective they were. So they turned to Stateville Penitentiary in Illinois, offering inmates reduced sentences if they volunteered to be bitten by infected mosquitoes. 10 bites a day, to be exact. Over 400 prisoners signed up, and the results were pretty awful. Inmates suffered fevers as high as 106 degrees, and some anti-malaria treatments caused serious side effects like heart attacks. That's as serious as a heart attack. These experiments went on for 30 years too, often without proper consent or care. In 1971, microbiologist Ananda Chakrabarty at General Electric engineered a strain of bacteria that could break down crude oil faster than any natural bacteria. He combined plasmids, which are basically little loops of DNA that bacteria use to share useful traits, combined them with 4 oil-eating bacteria into one superbug, hoping to use it for cleaning up oil spills. Well, it worked in the lab, and in 1980 this bacteria became the first genetically modified organism to be patented in the United States. The idea was to throw this into an oil slick and let it eat through the mess. That's what eventually happened. After the Deepwater Horizon spill in 2010, natural oil-eating microbes exploded in number and helped digest millions of gallons of crude, but that was nature's own doing. When humans start releasing engineered bacteria, things can get dicey. There are concerns about disrupting microbial ecosystems, depleting oxygen in the water, or creating unexpected chemical byproducts. So, yeah, that all sounds pretty bad. Bacteria that eat oil sounds like a miracle solution, and in some ways it is. But at the same time though, tweaking even the smallest parts of nature can have ripple effects that we still don't fully understand. Bringing animals back to the wild sounds great too, but it's a lot harder than it seems. In the 1960s, conservationists tried reintroducing black-footed ferrets in the US, which were on the verge of extinction. They bred ferrets in captivity and then released them, but most of them died, either from diseases, habitat loss, or lack of food. The ferrets were competing with native predators as well. Another example is the Arabian oryx. Even though conservationists released captive-bred oryx into the desert, poaching kept their numbers low. So saving a species isn't just about putting an animal back into the wild. Without the right food, safe spaces, protection, it can turn into a long, painful struggle. In 1953, British scientist Bernard Kettlewell released light and dark-colored peppered moths in the woodlands of Birmingham and Dorset to test whether pollution was helping dart moths survive better by hiding them against soot-covered trees. He marked and tracked hundreds of moths and watched birds hunt them down. The data showed dart moths did have an advantage in polluted areas, while lighter ones did better in clean forests. Natural selection right in front of your eyes. But later on, people poked holes in it. Moths don't usually rest on tree trunks, which is exactly where Kettlewell placed them. The photos used to illustrate his findings were staged as well. In 2002, journalist Judith Hooper called the whole thing into question in her book Of Moths and Men, writing that the science was sloppy and biased. But researcher Michael Majerus spent 6 years between 2001 and 2007 redoing the study in a more natural setting. He found the same result though. Dart moths were eaten more often in clean environments. So the conclusion still stands, but the story's more complicated than the version that showed up in high school science books.
Starting off this countdown, we have the whalefin. Take a guess at what 2 animals were bred for this one. If you guessed a whale and a dolphin, you're correct. A whalefin is a mix between an Atlantic bottlenose dolphin and a false killer whale. The first recorded whalefin was born in 1981 in Tokyo SeaWorld, but sadly he only lived to around 6 months. Probably a prime example of why they shouldn't exist in the first place. Another whalefin was later born at a sea life park in Hawaii in 1985, but she had trouble reproducing and all her babies sadly passed away. In our 9th spot today, we have the horse human. And this one is going to ruin your day completely. In 2001, a man was caught trying to inject human sperm into a horse. He had done this to about 6 horses until he was caught by police and arrested. Thankfully, none of the horses got pregnant. But ew, imagine if they did? Woo. In our 8th spot, we have the Iron Age pig. Now take a look at this porker. He is a chunky guy. The Iron Age pig is a cross between a domestic pig and a wild boar. Now something about that cross just does not sit right with me. Now people like breeding these pigs because they can get a lot of meat out of them or just sell them for a lot. But they are considered very hostile animals. This is due to the fact that wild boars are typically more aggressive, and that's a dominant trait that gets passed along to their offspring. Moving on to number 7, we have the infertile pink bullworm. The pink bullworms are invasive pests that lay eggs on cotton balls, and then once they hatch, the larvae eat the seeds and damage the cotton fibers. In 2005, the situation became so bad that scientists were like, okay, we gotta figure out a solution here. So they decided to create sterile pink bullworms. They did this by treating a bunch of moths with radiation. The radiation would damage their reproductive cells, but it wouldn't kill them. That way, when they encountered a normal pink bullworm and the two mated, bam, it would create an infertile pink bullworm. So for 4 years, 2 billion pink bullworm moths that were treated with radiation were released into Arizona's cotton fields. They literally would fly an airplane above the fields and just drop millions of these moths down onto the crops. And it worked. It helped with the bullworm problem. But imagine if their plan didn't work. That could have gone really bad and damaged entire cotton fields. Coming in at number 6, we have the sheep with human livers. In 2007, scientists at the University of Nevada, Reno managed to grow human livers inside of a sheep. They did this by injecting human stem cells from bone marrow into sheep fetuses. Now they chose sheep as their test subjects because their circulatory system is very similar to ours. In the end, they managed to create livers made with 20% human cells. They are hopeful that one day this can be used to help grow human organs for those in need of a transplant inside these animals. But anything done with animals is highly controversial, especially when it has to do with injecting them with human DNA and stuff. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the cows. I swear, no animal is safe out there, okay? Not even cows. In 2008, British researchers were given the okay to conduct some human-animal experiments. As part of the experiment, they decided to manipulate cow eggs. So they took the nucleus of the cow egg, which has the source of the most DNA, and they replaced it with the nucleus of a human cell to create a growing embryo. They then watched the egg develop and multiply. Scientists could then extract the stem cells from this. They hope that one day they can use the stem cells in disease treatments. Moving on to number 4, we have the Jeep. And I'm not talking about the car Jeep, we're talking G-E-E-P, okay? A mixture between a goat and a sheep. Now these animals are adorably cute, but sadly breeding the two can be a very risky game. Very few babies are actually carried to term, and even few manage to survive birth. Those that do often have a bunch of genetic abnormalities. But people still cross them together, which is just sad because you're breeding animals destined for failure, and for what reason? Moving on to number 3, we have the Jaglion. Can you guys guess what this animal is a mix between? It's kinda obvious. It's a mix between a jaguar and a lion. But these animals are actually naturally born, which is wild. Like, I just can't imagine a jaguar and a lion getting it on. So it first started when a lion and a jaguar coexisted in the same zoo together. They were raised together and, well, one thing led to another, bada bing bada boom, mama lion became preggo. I shared this love story in another video, but it's so cute but also sad, but I just want to share it again. So there once was a jaguar named Diablo and a lion named Lola. The two were raised side by side and they were inseparable. When Lola got mature though, they kept Diablo away from her so that they wouldn't mate. But whenever they were apart, both animals got depressed. It got so bad to the point where Lola wouldn't even eat. So they brought them back together and they were happy and eating and thriving again. You can't keep true love apart. And obviously one thing did lead to another and they did end up mating and they had 2 Jaglion babies together. And they all lived happily ever after. Coming in at number 2, we have the goat human. I can't with this one. Okay? I just can't. But this image right here is said to be a picture of a human goat baby. Story goes that in 2016 in Alabama, of all places, a goat gave birth to an odd-looking baby. In fact, its kid looked very human-like. So it's said that this goat was actually the product of a human getting it on with a goat. I know, I know it's disgusting. It's disgusting. I threw up in my mouth a little when I read that, but again, this is just a rumor. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the hybrid lions. Now, this is actually a very sad example of crossbreeding gone wrong. In 2006, nearly 24 crossbred lions in northern India were dying after they developed a mysterious disease. The disease was a result of inbreeding and a weakened gene pool. Basically, they didn't know this, but they kept breeding lions that all had this weakened gene, and nearly 80 lions were affected by this. The lions being born had weak hind legs and had difficulty walking, and they couldn't run at all. They also had failing immune systems and they weren't living too long. But the worst part was that they let these animals suffer. There's a wildlife law in India which prohibits the killing of animals. So basically, they had to just wait for these lions to die a slow, painful death on their own. It's a very tragic case of breeding gone wrong.
Number 10, a wolfen. A wolfen is part whale, part dolphin. The existence of wolfens have been a legend for centuries. Known in fisherman lore as the Great Grey Beast, they come from the mating of a female bottlenose dolphin with a male false killer whale. Now, a false killer whale, by the way, is not actually a whale. Both these animals come from the oceanic dolphin family with the toothed whale suborder. Wolfens are one of the rarest hybrid animals. Citizen wolfen sightings in the wild are common, but concrete evidence still eludes scientists. Currently, we can only reliably see these animal hybrids in captivity. Wolfens are an extremely interesting balance of their parents as well. Their skin is a dark gray, the perfect blend of light gray dolphin skin and black false killer whale skin. They also have 66 teeth, which is the precise average of a dolphin's 88 teeth and the false killer whale's 44 teeth. To me, these look weird and they kind of make me uncomfortable. Number 9. Wolf dog. A wolf dog, also called a wolf dog hybrid or wolf hybrid, is a candid hybrid resulting from the mating of a wolf and a dog. The term wolf dog is preferred by most of the animal's proponents and breeders because the domestic dog recently was taxonomically recategorized as a subspecies of wolf. The American Veterinary Medical Association and the United States Department of Agriculture refers to the animals as wolf dog hybrids. Rescue organizations consider any dog with wolf heritage within the last 5 generations to be a wolf dog, including some established wolf dog breeds. In 1998, USDA estimated an approximate population of 300,000 wolf dogs in the United States, the highest of any country worldwide, with some other sources giving a population possibly as high as 500,000. In the first generation of hybrids, gray wolves are most often crossed with wolf-like dogs such as German Shepherds, Siberian Huskies, and Alaskan Mammutes for an appearance most appealing to owners desiring to own an exotic pet. Because wolf dogs are generic mixtures between wolves and dogs, their physical and behavior characteristics cannot be predicted with any certainty. Number 8. Zebroid. A hybrid between a zebra and any other member of the equine family is one of the most common in the animal kingdom. In most cases, the sire is a zebra stallion, the mother could be anyone. Known collectively as zebroid, the name of the breed depends on who the mother is. A fowl could be a zorse, zebrel, zonkey, zebunky, or a zoni. Zebra hybrids usually have the appearance of whichever animal they have been crossbred with, while still retaining the striped coat of a pure zebra. Now, most of these animals don't have fully striped coats. Instead, the stripes are usually found on just the legs or non-white areas of the body, depending on the genetics of the non-zebra parent. When it comes to zonkies, donkeys are closely related to zebras, and both animals belong to the horse family. These zebra-donkey hybrids are very rare. In South Africa, they occur where zebras and donkeys are found in proximity to each other. Today, various zebroids are bred as riding and draft animals and as curiosities in circuses and smaller zoos. Number 7. Growler bear. Known variously as a Pizzly bear, a growler bear is a grizzly and polar bear hybrid that is a rare hybrid within the Ursidae family. Tales of such creatures were told within the First Nation communities of North America down the centuries. But it wasn't until DNA samples were taken from a strange-looking bear found near Sash Harbor in the Canadian Arctic in 2006 that their existence was finally confirmed. Growler bears are interesting because, generally speaking, polar bears and grizzlies have a
a mutual contempt for one another and will rarely coexist in captivity or in their natural habitats. However, extreme situations and human interventions have produced more of these adorably shaggy caramel-colored hybrid bears. They typically grow to be slightly smaller than polar bears, averaging 60 inches tall at the shoulder and around 1,000 pounds, but they're better to be able to survive in warm climates thanks to their grizzly bear genes. Number 6. Jag lion. A jag lion, sometimes referred to as a jagyun, is one of the many portmanteaus used to define hybrid species of animals. In this case, it is a blend of two cats, a lion, and a jaguar. Both belong to the genus Panthera. Their genetics aren't too far off. It's not surprising that they're able to mate, but they are extremely rare. A jag lion is the offspring of a female lion, lioness, and a male jaguar. To date, there haven't been any matings of a male lion and a female jaguar, so that hybrid doesn't have its own special name. Now, spots are definitely a dominant gene, and any speckled big cat is sure to pass them on to their offspring. And like its mother, the jag lion cub has a distinct tuft of hair at the end of its tail. It wasn't until the 21st century that this crossbreed became known to the world. Before this century, there hadn't been any record of such a cross being made, despite experiments in crossbreeding lions, leopards, and tigers. They are rare. And how rare is extremely rare? Well, right now there are only 2 jag lions in the world. They live in Canada and they were bred unintentionally and are in captivity. There has been no written record of any other crossbreeding between lions and jaguars. Number 5. The Iron Age pig. The Iron Age pig is a hybrid between a wild boar and a domestic Tamworth pig meant to recreate the type of pig represented by prehistoric works of the Iron Age in ancient Europe. A project to create them under the name Iron Age pig started in the early 1980s. In many areas, a variable of mixtures of these hybrids and feral pigs of all domesticated original stock have become invasive species. Their status as pest animals has reached crisis proportions in Australia, parts of Brazil, and parts of the United States, and the animals are often freely hunted in hopes of eradicating them or at least reducing them to a controllable population. When bred intentionally, the hybrids are intended to visually recreate the backbreed look of pigs represented in the prehistoric artworks of the Iron Age and in early ancient Egypt. Now, generally, they are only raised in Europe for a specialty meat market, and in keeping with their heritage, are generally more aggressive and harder to handle than pure domestic pigs. Number 4. Beefalo. Beefalo constitute a hybrid offspring of domestic cattle, usually a male in managed breeding programs, and the American bison, usually a female in managed breeding programs. Accidental crosses were noticed as long ago as 1749 in the southern states of North America during British colonization. Cattle and bison were first intentionally crossbred during the mid-19th century. In 1983, the 3 main beefalo registration groups reorganized under the American Beefalo World Registry. Until November 2008, there were 2 beefalo associations, the American Beefalo World Registry and American Beefalo International. These organizations joined to form American Beefalo Association Incorporated, which currently operates as the registering body for beefalo in the United States. Now, the breed was created to combine the characteristics of both animals for beef production. A recent USDA study showed beefalo meat, like bison meat, actually tended to be lower in fat and cholesterol. They are also thought to produce less damage to the rangeland than cattle. Personally, I just think saying beefalo is fun. You should try it. Number 3. Green sea slug. Possibly the most unusual hybrid animal on this list is the green sea slug. It's a sea slug that incorporates genetic material from the algae it eats into its own DNA. So it's part sea slug, part algae. The strange result is a plant-animal hybrid that can consume food like an animal or create its own nutrients via photosynthesis. Scientists call these sea slugs emerald green alcia. Their ability to turn solar energy into food is what gives them their brilliant green hue. Scientists acknowledge that they'll have to do more research in order to determine how this phenomenon happens, but as of now, this is their only successful instance of gene transfer from one type of complex organism to another. This creature can be found along the east coast of the United States, including the states of Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Maryland, Rhode Island, Florida, and Texas. They can also be found as far north as Nova Scotia, Canada, and are most commonly found in salt marshes, tidal marshes, pools, and shallow creeks. Number 2. Hybrid crocodile. The only known hybrid crocodile in the world is named Yai. Yai's parents are a saltwater crocodile and a Siamese crocodile. The crossbreeding happened only because its parents were kept together in a zoo. It wouldn't have occurred in the wild as these two types of crocodiles have different habitats. Yai is huge. And in the year 2000, Guinness World Records said he was the world's largest crocodile held in captivity at 19 feet and 8 inches, which is as tall as a giraffe. He also weighed 2,645 pounds, which is almost the amount of 2 cows. Since then, Yai has grown even more and is now 21 feet long. He's located at the Samtapakran Crocodile Farm and Zoo in Thailand. I hope I said that right. All I gotta say is I'm glad he's in captivity. I can't imagine how I would react if I saw him out in the wild. And coming in at number 1, the super cow. The super cow, also known as a Belgian blue cow, is a breed of beef cattle from Belgium. The Belgium's blue's extremely lean, hyper-sculpted, ultra-muscular physique is termed double muscling. The double muscling phenotype is a heritable condition resulting in an increased number of muscle fibers instead of the normal enlargement of individual muscle fibers. This particular trait is shared with another breed of cattle known as Piedmontese. Both of these breeds have an increased ability to convert feed into lean muscle, which causes these particular breeds' meat to have a reduced fat content and reduced tenderness. The Belgian blue is named after its typically blue-gray mottled hair, however, its actual color can vary from white to black. The Belgian blue has been exported to many parts of the world. It is reported by DATIS by 24 countries in Africa, the Americas, Europe, and Oceania. Of these, 10 report population data. In 2022, the world population was estimated to be around 107,875. Now, double-muscled cows routinely experience dystocia difficulty in parturition, even when bred to normal beef bulls or dairy bulls because of a narrower birth canal. The birth weight and width of the calf also may be higher than in animals without the double muscling gene. People also think it's unfair to breed these animals because of their difficulty walking due to the muscles and how big they are. These cows are absolutely jacked, and I would not want to run into one of them or get in a fight with it.
In our number 10 spot, we have mice with human butts. Okay, so not exactly human butts per se, but with human anal sphincters, which, if you don't know what that is, don't worry, I didn't either, I had to look it up. An anal sphincter is a group of muscles at the end of the rectum that surrounds the anus and controls the release of stool, aka poop. So anyways, in 2011, scientists were able to create a human-mouse hybrid by bioengineering human anal sphincters out of human nerves and muscles and surgically transplanting them onto their rear ends. Yep, sounds horrifying, but this was in fact an experiment that was done with the hope that, if proven successful, the scientists can help humans by making replacement anal sphincters for them. They were quite happy with their results, as the mice seemed to take well to them as they fused with the rest of the flesh. They even found that the mice could relax and contract them like their own natural sphincters. Wild. Coming up at our number 9 spot, we have the mouse with the ear. In 1997, a team of Harvard and MIT scientists got together to perform an experiment where they put a scaffolding in the shape of a human ear inside a mouse. It was made of biodegradable materials, and so eventually the scaffolding was absorbed into the mouse's body, making a biological ear of flesh and cartilage. This could be removed and actually surgically transplanted onto a human. Whoa, this is truly mind-blowing to me. If this project continued, it could mean great things for plastic surgeons everywhere whom are known to have a hard time reconstructing ears. But of course, this was a very expensive project, so it hasn't been able to continue. I hope the mouse with the ear got to live a long life. In our number 8 spot, we have mice with human brains. This is one of those experiments that makes you wonder what the world will look like in 20 years. This is an experiment that was done in 2014 where mice were given millions of human brain cells. Each mouse in the experiment had about 12 million human cells, to be in fact, and in the experiment the researchers noticed that the human cells tended to take over the mouse brain cells. Move over, we're more powerful than you. The experiment was quite the success, with the scientists discovering that these mice showed that their memory was 4 times stronger stronger than a regular mouse's. Unfortunately though, they had to go through some pretty inhumane practices to learn this fact, including playing really loud music and attacking the mice with an electrical shocking tool. They were then able to measure how the mice reacted the next time they heard the sound. Gosh, memory is such a crazy thing. To think that sound, smell, taste, sight, touch can all cause pain if there's a specific memory attached to them is honestly wild. In today's 7th spot, we have monkeys with human cells. Okay, so you're probably thinking, isn't this possibly a dangerous experiment as humans and monkeys are already super close to each other in many ways? Well, in 2007, Yale University decided to take the risk and find out. They put human neural stem cells into 5 different monkeys to analyze how it would affect Parkinson's disease. The experiment proved to be quite successful as the monkeys who suffered with the disease all could eat and walk and move way better than they could before. They also observed that the monkeys had no tumors or tremors and no bad side effects. The experiment was quite ethically controversial even though it was a success, and so whether it continues to be done with monkeys in the future is unclear. In our number 6 spot, we have the human chimpanzee. Another risky experiment, but one that was done when there wasn't a very high concern for human ethics, so aka a while ago. Apparently in 1967, a group of Chinese scientists were successful in impregnating a chimpanzee with human sperm. 2 Chinese scientists have claimed this, but it hasn't been officially confirmed to be true. But from what they have said, they were successful with their experiment, and the chimpanzee was 3 months pregnant, only to be killed in a horrific attack on the lab, and all of their work was destroyed. It is said that this was due to the Cultural Revolution at the time. In any case, scientists have claimed to want to try this experiment again in the 80s, but nothing came of it. Probably for the best, as it has also been said that they plan to use this human-chimpanzee hybrid to drive carts and herd sheep and also send it out to space. This is purely on the basis of it having a human brain, of course. But yeah, maybe ethically not a good reason for creating these creatures. In our number 5 spot today, we have the human mouse. In a series of experiments in 2010, scientists at the Salk Institute were able to create a mouse with almost an entirely human liver. Whoa. In the past, experiments like this were done on chimpanzees, and there was a lot of controversy over this as there was much speculation in regards to the ethics of this experiment. So the researchers opted for mice to be safe. Honestly, you would think that there would be controversy over all animals, but anyways, the project was supposed to study diseases such as hepatitis B and C and malaria. After injecting the mice with the illnesses, the researchers tried testing for a cure. There's been many breakthroughs so far, and so scientists continue to be hopeful with these experiments. In our number 4 spot today, we have the human pig. An experiment was done in the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota to try and examine how human cells would interact with pig cells if they were to come in contact with each other. Through concocting this experiment, the clinic was able to successfully produce a pig with human cells. Yes, it was still a pig seemingly on the outside, but on the inside, half of its cells were human. They injected human cells into pig fetuses, and voila! A human-pig hybrid. Through doing this experiment, they noticed that the pig cells stayed to one side of the body while the human cells stayed to the other side. But every so often, some of the cells would interact and fuse together to make a brand new DNA, a human-pig DNA. Pretty cool. It would be awesome if they would allow these animals to grow so that they can study them to see if they end up being able to do any humanly functions over time, but as such, that is not the case so far. In our number 3 spot today, we have human animal milk. Scientists from Russia and Belarus successfully genetically modified goats to produce human breast milk. Since then, scientists from all over have been trying to make the milk more human. As much as the Russian and Belarusian scientists tried tried, they only managed to make the milk 60% human with a specific enzyme, lysamine, and the protein lactoferrin being apparent. They are usually found in human milk. Apparently, a Chinese team made a whole herd of cattle, that's 300 cattle, that produced human milk. The goal is to make human breast milk more available in stores for mothers that can't breastfeed and have to resort to formula. There's talk of the same company wanting to create a human milk cheese, and that is where I draw the line. What is the purpose of this? Just no. In our number 2 spot today, we have human organs. There is a scientist named Hiromitsu Nagauchi who was given a $1.4 million grant from the US Army to work on developing human-animal hybrids with the purpose to create a farm of animals that can be harvested for human hearts and lungs. Of course, one of the biggest reasons for these types of experiments is to see if we can find a way to solve the human organ shortage that is needed for transplants around the world. The idea of creating a farm to harvest these organs would be revolutionary for humans and would give a patient a higher likelihood of getting one and surviving. So an incredible cause, even though the idea of doing it, well, I'm glad I don't have that job. In 2017, Hiromitsu and his team created 186 pig-human hybrids that unfortunately was only allowed to develop for 28 days before they were destroyed. Apparently, his team is currently working on a sheep-human hybrid. They have yet to have complete success, but they feel that they are getting closer and closer. Finally, coming up in our number 1 spot today, we have the Rabbit Man. Yes, you heard that correctly. A man that is a rabbit. I was gonna say, something out of a nightmare, but honestly, nah, a pig man would be way more terrifying. In Shanghai in 2003, a team of scientists successfully infused human cells in rabbit eggs in a laboratory dish, creating an embryo of a new creature that was, yes, you guessed it, half rabbit, half human. Apparently, the United States scientists have been trying to perform this experiment for quite some time, but never managed to fully pull it off as none ever survived. In this experiment, the majority of the DNA in the creatures was human, and just a small amount of them was rabbit. Apparently, they never allowed the world to see this creature, as after a few days of growth, they decided to destroy it and harvest it for stem cells. Damn. Why would they go through all of that trouble only to destroy it? We could have possibly had our first talking animal. Oh, humans.
Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have the centaur. This is one of the most famous hybrid creatures of all time, the infamous horseman of Greek legends. It isn't quite clear exactly how this legend originated, but there is a really interesting theory, which I love. Basically, some people believe that perhaps the idea for this creature came about when the people of the Minoan culture, who are said to have possibly at the time been unfamiliar with horses, they ran into a tribe of horse riders. The skill these people had in riding horses, along with how being able to traverse on horse would of course change the way that the Minoan people lived, basically just inspired them to create these tales of the horse-human hybrid creature. This seems like a very possible origin for the legend, but regardless of where it came from, the legend stuck around into Roman times, where it was then highly debated whether or not these creatures actually may exist. Clearly, however, this legend would go on to endure long past the days of ancient Rome, considering the fact that the tales of the centaur still exist today. In our number 9 spot today, we have the echidna. The echidna is a half-woman, half-snake creature that first became well known through Greek mythology. In the legends, she is described as being half beautiful maiden and half fearsome snake. In fact, Hesiod described her as an irresistible monster who is like neither mortal men nor the undying gods. Instead, she was, quote, half a nymph with glancing eyes and fair cheeks, and half again a huge snake, great and awful with speckled skin, and she, quote, dies not nor grows old all her days. Echidna is the partner to Typhon, who is a terrifying snake man, and the two are said to have created the most horrendous children. The first child was Orthrus, who was a two-headed dog who guarded the cattle of Geryon. The second child was Cerberus, who was a dog with more than two heads who guarded the gates of Hades. And finally, their third child was the Lernaean Hydra, a serpent with many heads who had the ability to regrow any if they were to get cut off. This is all to say that Echidna had quite a terrifying story to her, and it's interesting because some scholars believe that the tales of dragons in medieval Europe were actually based in part on Echidna. In our number 8 spot today, we have the mandrake. If you're a Harry Potter fan, you might be familiar with mandrakes, and they are particularly interesting because they are one of the few examples that represent a human hybrid that is a mix between human and plant. The mandrake plant is a very real group of plants in the genus Mandragora, and they are usually found in the Mediterranean. It is believed that the tails of the mandrake come from the fact that often the roots of the mandrake have such a strange appearance they sort of look like human faces. This likely would have been enough to fuel the legends, but things do not end here. The thing is that this plant has some hallucinogenic properties, so that, combined with the weird face-looking roots, and you have the perfect recipe for quite a legend. It's funny to think that this story probably started out because someone was on a bit of a trip. In the legends, when the plant is dug up from the ground, it will release a horrible scream that has the ability to kill anyone who hears it. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Sphinx. The Sphinx is of course commonly associated with ancient Egypt, and it is the creature that is depicted with the head of a human, the body of a large cat, and the wings of an eagle. Like I said, this image is often associated with ancient Egypt due to the famous monument that can be visited in Giza still today. But this isn't the only place the Sphinx is seen in legends. In Greek tradition, the Sphinx plays the role of a merciless woman who will kill and eat anyone who cannot answer her riddle, as seen in the tragedy of Oedipus. When we take it over to Egypt, the Sphinx is often seen with the head of a man and was seen as a benevolent creature with incredible strength. The legends and imagery of the Sphinx have long endured the years since these ancient empires and continue today, and have even expanded into different cultures. In our number 6 spot today, we have sirens. These creatures originated from the tales of ancient Greece, and in these stories, sirens were creatures with the head and upper body of a human woman, but with the legs and tails of a bird. These creatures were alluring and exceptionally dangerous, mostly to sailors. The siren would sing a beautiful song from the rocky shores, which were said to hide dangerous reefs below the water. Using her songs, she would lure sailors to this treacherous area, likely to meet their demise. The siren is an important character in the legend of Odysseus as he returned from Troy in the epic. In the legend, he had to tie himself to the mast of his ship in order to resist the temptations and the lure. The tales of the siren have lasted for years and were still quite prevalent when they made a reappearance in the writings of 17th century Jesuit priests, who believed that these creatures were in fact real. Today we still use the word siren and the term siren song to describe things or ideas that are exceptionally intriguing and alluring. Throughout the years, the descriptions of the siren have gone on to become a bit more mermaid-like than bird-like as they originated, which does bring me to my next point. In our number 5 spot today, we have mermaids. Mermaids are one of the most famous creatures in our modern mythology that came all the way from ancient Assyria. These creatures with the upper body of a human and the lower body of a fish, all from the goddess Atargatis, who transformed herself into a mermaid after she was ashamed of herself for accidentally killing her partner. A tragic story that spurred the tales of mermaids for centuries to come. Since these legends, mermaids have appeared in stories all over the world, and often people regard them as less than fictional. Christopher Columbus swore he saw real mermaids on his voyage to the New World, but then again it's becoming abundantly clear that he had no idea what he was looking at for a lot of that journey. Some places and cultures have slightly varying versions of the mermaid, like the Selkie, which is an Irish and Scottish version of a mermaid who is half seal and half woman. Of course, this creature went on to inspire many famous stories, including the Disney smash hit, The Little Mermaid. In our number 4 spot today, we have a harpy. Harpies are a character seen in Greek and Roman stories, and in those they are described as a bird, but with the head of a woman. And at first I thought that sounds kind of nice and cute, but when we take it back to some of the earliest mentions of harpy, like by the poet Ovid, we see them described as human vultures, which sounds significantly more terrifying than what I was imagining. In fact, harpies are quite often described as horrifying, disgusting creatures, with descriptions that only get more grim as time goes on. Initially, it seems as though harpies were seen as the personification of storm winds, and throughout the legends we see that they would often steal food from their victims as they were trying to eat, and also they would be responsible for carrying those who had done evil things to the Erinyes, who were the female deities of vengeance. When a person suddenly disappeared off the earth, it is thought to have been the work of the harpies. They were the agents of punishment who were known to be cruel, vicious, and pretty violent as well.
In our number 3 spot today, we have the Gorgons. It is possible that you may not be familiar with the term Gorgon, but it is very likely that you know one of them. The descriptions of the Gorgons do vary slightly, but they commonly refer to 3 sisters: Stheno, Euryale, and Medusa. These sisters were mostly human, except for the fact that their hair was made up of slithering, slimy snakes. The earliest examples of the Gorgons comes from the Greek mythology, in which the Gorgon-like creature had scales and claws, but no serpent hair. When the tales of the 3 sisters came into play, so did the stories of how they had horrifying faces that, should anyone gaze upon them, they would immediately be turned into stone. In the legends, 2 of the sisters are immortal, but the most famous of the trio, Medusa, was not. This led to her being slain by the demigod Perseus, but not so much could be said for the other 2. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Minotaur. This creature was first seen in Greek legends and later Roman, and basically it is a creature that is part bull, part man. The name of this creature comes from the bull god Minos, who was a major deity in ancient times. The Minotaur is said to have been created as Minos competed with his brothers as ruler. During this time, Minos prayed to Poseidon, the sea god, to send him a snow-white bull as a sign of the god's favor. Minos was meant to sacrifice the bull in order to honor Poseidon, but he was entranced by the bull's beauty and decided to keep him, thinking that the god would accept a different sacrifice in place of the bull. Of course, Poseidon was not pumped about this decision, so he needed to punish Minos. He did this by making Minos' wife fall in love with the bull, and one thing led to another, and there was some very unnatural offspring. In the end, the Minotaur was born, but there was no natural food source for this creature, so instead it began to devour human flesh to appease its appetite. The creature is depicted as having the head and tail of a bull with the body of a man. While the most famous appearance of the Minotaur was in the Greek story of Theseus, who actually fought the Minotaur in the labyrinth, the legend of this creature has long prevailed and is seen in many stories still today, including Dungeons and Dragons, and some would even argue that the Beast in Beauty and the Beast is a creature modeled after the Minotaur. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Satyr. We're not just talking about Mr. Tumnus, we're taking it all the way back to the Greek stories of the creature who is half man and half goat. These creatures started out in legends as a male nature spirit with ears and a tail resembling those of a horse, but throughout the years they became more human-like and less beast-like before they began to gain these more goat-like characteristics. It is thought that perhaps the depiction of the goat-human hybrid comes from them sort of melding with the character Pan. Either way, these creatures are often depicted as being comically hideous, and they also have quite a few lewd descriptions that I can't exactly detail here on YouTube. Let's just say it is very obvious that they're always a little excited. This fits perfectly with the fact that these creatures are often known to love things like wine, music, dancing, and definitely women. Satyrs were companions to the god Dionysus and are believed to live in places like woodlands or the mountains or even in pastures. They are very motivated by sexual desires and are even known to do some pretty horrendous things in pursuit of these desires. Although these characters are quite ridiculous in a multitude of ways, they are also thought to possess a lot of really useful knowledge, but they need to be persuaded into sharing it. How human. That's the most human-like characteristic that these guys have.
Number 10, the chimpanzee human, also referred to as humanzees, which is fun to say. Look, here are the facts, people. We're very close to chimpanzees, DNA-wise. Around 98% of our DNA is shared with these hairy fellows. Back in the 1920s, we got closer than ever. A humanzee was not just a fantasy. Soviet biologist Ilya Ivanov inseminated female chimps with human DNA, but it didn't work. Or did it? Things got questionable when a chimp named Oliver hit the scene in the 70s. Yeah, he was walking like a human, which we've never really seen before. He was referred to as the missing link because of his appearance and the way you would act. He was previously a performance animal. He was a show chimp, so not a hybrid, but many viewed these experiments as immoral back in the day. Which is, yeah, I agree. Also, I remember seeing chimps in family movies, I'm pretty sure. Remember those movies growing up where chimpanzees were like snowboarding or playing hockey? Most Extreme Primate, that was it. That's where we're at, chimpanzees doing barrel rolls and hockey stops. My friends, we're already there. I think we're already at the Planet of the Apes terrifying point. We're screwed if one of these experiments works, that's all I'm saying. Number 9, human cow eggs. Okay, we had a few giggles talking about chimps. Time to get into the real scary science. Back in 2008, hybrid research was being done. Human-animal hybrid research, obviously. The whole idea was to find a cure for Parkinson's disease. I like these projects because we're moving forward, at least. We're not just doing it because we're like, let's see if we can bring dinosaurs back. We're trying to find a solution. Otherwise, we don't need to be poking around cows. Nobody needs 3 bowls of cereal before gym class, okay? There's other ways to wake up in the morning. Let's just leave cows alone for like a bit, maybe? Scientists used the nucleus of a cow egg. They took it out and replaced that nucleus with the human and skin cells. And then in a little time, the egg can develop and turn into a blastocyst, aka a cloned embryo. And there we have stem cells for said science. Again, this is a lovely step, but how far do we go here with DNA mixing? How much DNA are we gonna mix before we're like, stop? Things could go south. For example, just like the number 8, Kunga. Perhaps the earliest example of human-animal hybrid testing. Scientists recently learned about this donkey hybrid that roamed ancient Mesopotamia. This was a time even before horses arrived, so they had to do something. Large Kungas would pull wagons, and smaller ones would help pulling plows and smaller loads. These little guys were the talk of the town. Imagine a hybrid animal before horses. No wonder they were a status symbol back then. 4,000 years ago, they were given as gifts for weddings. Nice, yummy. Oh, I wonder what this one is. It's definitely a Kunga. It's gotta be a Kunga. After so long, scientists are finally able to figure out what exactly a Kunga was a hybrid of. It was a female donkey and a male Syrian wild ass. Yeah, it's crazy what you can still learn from ancient animal bones from thousands of years ago. Science is incredible. It's more amazing how involved this hybrid was in Mesopotamian culture. Do we bring back the Kunga? I don't know. Kinda seems like we could use them. Number 7, woolly mammoth. It was announced less than a year ago that a team of scientists and entrepreneurs over at a new biosciences and genetics company called Colossal, they got the funding finally for quite this project. They're planning to bring the woolly mammoth back to life. Yep. Instead of just paying off student loans, they're like, how about we bring a mammoth back? Let's just see if we can do that. That'll solve some problems. The last mammoth alive was around 7,500 years ago. But what if we had these hairy Goliaths back again today? The Siberian tundra thousands of years ago was once full of these guys, but climate change began to slow them down. Also, humans needing food definitely didn't help. These guys provided warmth and, well, obviously look at them. Lots of food, so they died off quite quick. Genetics company Colossal raised over $15 million to try and bring this thing back to life. And they're on the way, they're doing it right now. That's happening as we speak. A mammoth is being born. They're using the CRISPR gene editing tool, which is a fun tool, I guess. Elephants are still kicking around and their genomes, combined with the preserved mammoth DNA, is the magic trick. So if you see mammoths trending on Twitter in 4 to 6 years, well, you know why. There's not another Ice Age movie. It's definitely just a real mammoth. Number 6, Pyrenean ibex. The Pyrenean ibex also went extinct a long time ago. This was much sooner though than mammoths. This was around 2000. The last one was a female named Celia, and a falling tree sadly ended her life. Of all the ways to go, really? Come on, man, that's sad. It was a subspecies of the Spanish ibex. They were native to the Pyrenees Mountains on the border of Spain and France. Back in the medieval ages, their population was reduced drastically to an endangered level because of, knights and swords and bows equals lunch, right? So the numbers dipped. More than fair, this army's to feed. But in 2009, science was ready for the Pyrenean ibex to return. It was successfully cloned and brought back from extinction for 7 whole minutes. Yeah, 7 minutes in heaven, or 7 minutes out of heaven, rather. DNA from the last living lady was implanted in the womb of a domestic goat. Yeah, a little goat hybrid. Lung complications are why the clone sadly didn't last, but we had a hybrid medieval animal for 7 minutes. We're getting close. Number 5, the super cow. Moo, but with a lot of O's. Introducing the super cow. Okay, start your day off with some super milk, and then have a super stomach ache. Your super pants. My god, I can't do milk anymore. Only in Belgium. Back in the 1800s, scientists and farmers brought together native cattle and short horn cattle to make this hybrid animal. After that, they would literally just pick the biggest cows of the bunch and then have them breed together, and then so on and so forth. These cows are officially called Belgian Blues, but I will continue to call them super cows. Thank you very much. That sounds amazing. I can't even look at them. God, they're disturbing. They look like bodybuilders. It makes no sense. What? Where does that come from? Let's move on. Number 4, Tasmanian tiger. Once native to Australia, the Tasmanian tiger, also known as the thylacine, was a massive carnivorous marsupial that went extinct around the 1930s, also quite recently. Major factors here are, as you guessed what I said earlier, climate change, hunting, and its genetic diversity wasn't all too great. All those combined, it's just no chance. It's sad on one hand because these beautiful creatures disappeared so recently, but it's also recent enough that we have a shot at bringing them back to life. Hey, what's up? Hey, you've been asleep. Hi. Hybrid science. There we go. Let's get mixing. Yeah, imagine looking outside and seeing this thing on your front yard. Are we ready for this? I think we're ready. Let's jazz up some trails by introducing these guys. Specimens of the Tasmanian tiger still remain preserved in jars. No idea who has them or why, but We'll move on from that. Thank God for those jars. So we have Tasmanian tiger genes present, so scientists can now insert them into a mouse fetus. They just combine fetus of a mouse and DNA. I do this a lot. This is how I'm gonna explain this to my kids and be like, hey, this is how the human life cycle works. You just do this with your hands a lot, and then you're alive. They're still lacking the full DNA to successfully recreate it, but they're close. A recent $5 million donation to the University of Melbourne earlier this year allowed for researchers to create a research lab. So, yep, they're actually getting very close. They're like making the lab to make this thing. I'm like, ooh, they're gonna do it. Number 3, the great razor auk. Yes, once thriving in colonies off North Atlantic coasts, the great auk would grow up to 30 inches long and its wings would only be used to swim. They were cute, but quite defenseless, these little guys. Around the 1500s, European fishermen discovered this perfect area for hunting and or eating, and it just happened to be where most of these great auks were hanging out. So they disappeared fast. By 1950, the last 2 known specimens were hunted by a single fisherman on Eldey Island, just off the coast of Iceland. And that was it. They were gone. Until now. Nice. Scientists plan on using genetic information extracted from their fossils or preserved organs. Remember those guys in jars and the organs that I talked about? Yep. Classic organs in jars. Always coming in handy. They plan on editing their DNA into the closest living species, which is now the razor-billed auk. So now we get a nice fun hybrid again. The organization Revive and Restore is behind the wheel on this one, so keep it up. Keep bringing things back from extinction, just not humans. I don't want zombies, please. Number 2, lions. Back in the 80s in the Chatbir Zoo in India, they started an experimental program where they would breed together domestic lions and African lions in the hopes that they would just be introduced to the wild and help with the dwindling population of wild lions in India. On paper, that's a great idea. That's a step forward. We love those. But the zoo found 2 African lions that were being used in a circus and was like, you know what? We're gonna save you guys. Get out of the circus. Then they brought them in to breed with their 2 Asiatic lions. So, I mean, from circus to science, it's like, you're still sorry. When the cubs were born, it was clear this was already a mistake from the get-go. The cubs already had severely weak back legs, they were having trouble walking as they got older, their immune system started to fail, and by 2000 they had bred more than 70 of these hybrid lions. So they finally decided to stop the program and all the males were given vasectomies in order to stop any further reproduction. There are luckily laws that prohibited them from killing these animals, so at this point we're just waiting for them to die naturally, which sucks, but it's definitely better. And finally, number 1, the dodo bird. Dodo birds were once big and beautiful. These flightless ground nesting birds once filled the islands of Mauritius located in the Indian Ocean. They were awesome. We've seen them in Ice Age. They're all funny and big and furry. They had massive talons. They were gray and blue. They were gorgeous, and best part of all, they didn't have any natural predator until, us. Until we came around. Around 1507, the island was discovered by Portuguese sailors, and well, the rest is history and or lunch. They were the easiest bird to hunt, hence the phrase dead as a dodo. They weren't just loved by sailors either, they were not 100% to blame here. Monkeys, rats, pigs, any animal basically that made its way to the island easily had their eggs for lunch, so it didn't take long for the dodo bird population to be completely wiped out. The last dodo was hunted in 1681, but could it be? Could we bring back said dodo birds? Scientists found an extremely well-preserved dodo skeleton back in 2007, so we may have a chance at picking some DNA apart there and bringing them back to life via hybrid science. A research facility near Melbourne, Australia is currently trying to use pigeon genes to bring the bird back. I mean, yeah, I'm all for the idea of bringing an animal back to life. Scientifically, that's definitely a feat in itself, but how long before these things are on hot ones, like dodo chicken wings? Now that I've said it, you kind of want one, right? Now you feel bad. There we go, hit that thumbs up so we don't feel guilty.
Project Bluebird was one of the CIA's earlier attempts to figure out how to control minds and influence behavior. This program was the precursor to MK Ultra, and it focused on using substances like LSD, hypnosis, and other psychological techniques to manipulate people. They wanted to create spies or assassins who could be controlled remotely without them even realizing it. Experimented on their own employees and even used soldiers and civilians as guinea pigs, all without telling them what was really going on. They tested things like sensory deprivation and sleep deprivation again to see how they could break someone's will and control their thoughts. It was, of course, a very shady program that relied heavily on the idea that people could be turned into mind-controlled agents. In the 60s and early 70s, the US Department of Defense had a plan to get rid of old, unwanted munitions. The operation was called CHASE, which stands for Cut Holes and Sink 'em. As you can probably guess, the strategy was to load up decommissioned ships with outdated weapons and then sink them in the ocean. Most of the munitions were conventional weapons, like ammo and artillery, but a small portion of the shipments involved some very dangerous stuff like chemical weapons. The disposal sites were in the Atlantic Ocean, off the coast of Florida and the Bahamas, and in the Pacific Ocean as well. One of the biggest concerns at the time was the environmental impact and the possibility that the chemical weapons could leach into the ocean and contaminate it. As you can imagine, dumping toxic substances into the ocean isn't the best long-term solution. In 1964, a ship called Village was sunk with 7,348 tons of munitions. About 5 minutes after it went under, there were huge explosions. The blasts were so powerful that seismic equipment around the world picked them up. Now, luckily, this hadn't been a chemical weapons dump, but it showed just how dangerous this really was. By the late 60s, public awareness and concerns over dumping chemical weapons in the ocean was starting to grow. This culminated in the media coverage of the Chase 10 operation in 1970, where thousands of tons of chemical weapons were disposed of off the coast. But thankfully, in 1972, the US passed the Marine Protection, Research and Sanctuaries Act, and a year later, the United Nations put out an international ban on dumping chemical weapons at sea. In the 40s and 50s, the US government tested atomic bombs in places like Nevada and the Pacific Ocean. They didn't just test the bombs though, they also exposed people to the radiation from the tests. Soldiers were told to march toward ground zero right after the bomb went off, as if they were part of some military exercise, but these soldiers were exposed to radiation that would lead to all kinds of health problems down the line. Then there were the civilians. Thousands of people living near test sites were also unknowingly exposed to radiation, and to top it off, the government didn't tell anyone how dangerous the tests were, so people had no idea they were being exposed to deadly radiation. It wasn't until decades later that the full scope of these tests came out, but by then, the damage was already done. Finally, we have the US government's human radiation experiments, which took place mostly during the Cold War era. These experiments involved deliberately exposing American citizens to radiation, again, without their knowledge or consent, in order to study the effects of radiation exposure. The most infamous examples involved injecting people with radioactive material or having them swallow radioactive pills, all in the name of science. Many of the people involved in these experiments had no idea they were being tested on. Some were even pregnant women or underage themselves. Obviously, these experiments caused some severe long-term health issues for the victims. The US government didn't come clean about it until decades later. Well, I guess what we've learned from this video is, if you're doing something really nefarious, just don't tell anyone about it, because who's going to agree to any of this? Oh yeah, I'll eat some radioactive pills. Whew, Cold War, not a fun time to live through.
In our number 3 spot, we have Hiromitsu Nagauchi. Hiromitsu is a scientist from Japan that is leading a team at the University of Tokyo. He and his team plans to grow human cells in mice and rat embryos and then transport them into surrogate animals, similar to work being done at Stanford University in the US. The goal is yet again to continue to see if animals can produce human organs that can later be transplants for humans. Up until recently, Japan was very strict as to how long the human cells in the embryos were allowed to be kept alive till. But recently the laws changed and they're allowed to be kept until the animal is brought to term. Whoa. This will help so much in terms of what they will be able to find through studying this process, but of course there are many ethical concerns around this experiment, such as once this new animal is brought to term, then won't it be a baby? Some claim that this is pure evil to then destroy this baby after, but gosh, I wonder if the decision maker of these experiments struggle with this, because I definitely would. In our number 2 spot, we have an unknown evil scientist that created the human sheep. In 2017, villagers of a small town in South Africa were frightened when a local sheep gave birth to a human sheep crossbreed. This is truly terrifying stuff that will haunt your dreams. Like, terrifying. It will definitely haunt mine. Imagine human sheep wandering the world. No thanks. Clearly this experiment was done by some evil scientist that decided, heck, I'm going to just let this happen and see how it unfolds. No one knows exactly how it was done, but most think the sheep was just artificially inseminated. The baby born was a stillborn, but if it had made it out alive, I bet you the world would have been on the hunt for the person responsible. In our number 1 spot, we have Ilya Ivanovich Ivanov. Known from his title, the Red Frankenstein, who was said to have been the creator of artificial insemination. His interest eventually turned into being interested in crossbreeding. In the 1920s, he traveled to Africa. After already successfully crossbreeding a zebra and a donkey, he now wanted to crossbreed a human and an ape. Apparently, after a while of living in Africa, he became desperate as his funds became increasingly low, that he then began to inseminate African women with chimpanzees without their knowledge. Holy, that's disgusting. Eventually, when people found out about what he was doing, he was shut down and his name was forever tarnished, and yeah, I'm glad, because that's horrible.
Number 10, monkey head transplant. Okay, right off the top, here we go, pun intended. The first ever successful monkey head transplant was back in the early 1970s. I imagine some of your parents may have heard about this. It's probably pretty hard to forget. Maybe ask them about it tonight while they're mid-bite at dinner. American researcher Robert White pulled off the otherwise impossible in a slow, tedious operation. White took the head of one monkey and then attached it to a headless monkey. Yeah, add a little time and energy and voila, this actually worked. Yeah, believe it or not, the monkey actually tried to bite one of the surgeons once it came to, which, I mean, totally fair. I'd be a little pissed off too if I just had a different body all of a sudden. Sadly, the monkey passed away 9 days later, which is much further than I ever thought. But the fact that this actually happened is 1, terrifying, and 2, dare I say, miraculous. This is some sci-fi stuff right here. And here you go, new head, enjoy. Number 9, monkey become human. Okay, this next test here is a little less hands-on, so if you have some food, you could probably take a bite during this one. It's safe. Back in 1931, psychologist Winthrop Kellogg, familiar name, he was curious. Yeah, he sat up one night out of the blue and thought, what would happen if a monkey was raised with humans? Yeah, would it end up like that monkey from MVP, Most Valuable Primate? Would it learn to play hockey for the local team? Or would it learn how to do kickflips with Tony Hawk? No, none of that shit happened. Surprise, surprise. Kellogg brought a baby female chimp named Gua into his home, and this man raised a chimp as if it were another human being alongside his own son, human son, Donald. Yeah, they played, they laughed, they did everything together, but the test ended abruptly after Kellogg's son, Donald, started to make chimp noises. Yeah, and then everyone was like, you know what? I'm good, let's cancel this. Maybe chimps can't learn how to heel flip. We're done, let's go home. So Gua was then released. There we go. No more human best friend, you know? Back to normal, dare I say, normal? Number 8, feel the music. Okay, this next one here is a little fun, and we're on a part 3, and I have to talk about it. I just have to talk about it. There are many odd experiments in history where humans should have left, human elements out, like music and illicit substances. I can't say what I want to say, but it's white, it's fluffy. It's a bad substance that's white and fluffy. There you go, that's all I'll say. YouTube's like, what is he saying? I can't figure it out. There you go, only you and I know. We're too smart for the algorithm. Well, back in 2011, a study was done where rats, just a bunch of rats, were all put in a room and on loop, they played a Miles Davis song. So they were all on said illicit substance, right? That stuff, and they were in a room while Miles Davis played all day long. Just smooth jazz all day. I'm not laughing because it's funny, it's the weirdest thing. Imagine walking into this room by accident, you're like, what's going on in here? Oh my god, everyone's all hopped up. Well, before the substances were injected into the test subjects, they all seemed to have calm demeanors while Beethoven played on loop. But after injected, all the rats were neurologically triggered to that smooth jazz. Yeah, after 1 week on the sauce, the rats were all of a sudden like, you know what? Miles Davis kind of slaps. Been sleeping on Miles Davis this whole time. They're all like, yeah, Miles Davis, really good, so good. Horrible animal research and taxpayers' money. Yeah, we love dark history here on Most Amazing Top 10. Number 7, the first pregnancy test. If you're looking past the ancient Egyptian times and their use of barley and urine to determine if somebody is pregnant, you'll often land on this experiment from the 1930s. Now, it was developed in 1931 by Dr. Maurice Friedman at the University of Pennsylvania Medical School. Now, what would happen is doctors would inject a rabbit with urine from a woman who was suspected of being pregnant, and the rabbit's ovaries could easily tell if that was the case. Accurate test? Yeah. Historical? Of course, it changed the game. Would it also end up with the rabbits passing away? Sadly, also a third yes. It's sad, but more often than not, when humans are involved with any medical process, the test subject dies. You know, before having its head transferred to another animal or something, you're like, what the f is happening here? Number 6, small brain and big brain. This next one here, I mean, again, we're on to part 3. We're getting into some f***ed up stuff. Here we go. In the early 19th century, humans were figuring out a lot of firsts, you know, especially German researcher Karl August Weinhold. He was on the quest to prove to all that the brain and its nervous system were both attached by wires. Yeah, in order to do so, he took brains and spinal cords of deceased cats, and he filled the cavities inside with zinc and silver batteries. And like we know now, the obvious happened. The bodies began to reanimate as if they were alive again. Huh, it's like it's black magic. Or batteries, probably batteries. It's definitely the batteries. This was the first time this type of test was done, and now we use electricity and silver for other ways, of course. But thanks to this curious doctor, the early 19th century saw some early Bill Nye the Gross Science Guy stuff. Again, imagine walking into this room by accident. Like, oh, what's going on in here now? Number 5, the multi-dog. Ah, nice, I love dogs. Let's get a bunch for the price of none. Back in the 50s, when a Soviet scientist, Vladimir Demikov, created a multi-dog, Time magazine had to cover it. Of course, this is a feat in science. As cruel as it sounds, of course, the adult dog had a newborn grafted to its neck. It's impressive, but also you're like, ew, my God, Jesus. So when it grew, it could survive off the blood of the main, bigger dog. The body, for lack of a better term, gross. When observed, the puppy did have its own characteristics, which was the craziest point here. Some say it was playful with its growls, just as the other dog's characteristics would be. It's a sad 1950s Soviet animal experiment, so of course the animal didn't survive for a long time. It just, you know, all of a sudden it was on something's neck and then it was in the next life. That's horrible. Number 4, the great razor auk. Once thriving in colonies off North Atlantic coast, the great auk would grow to 30 inches long and its wings would only be used to swim. They were little cute tiny boys. They were cute but quite defenseless, obviously, since they're not here anymore. Around the 1500s, European fishermen discovered this perfect area for hunting, and it just happened to be where most of these great auks were all living. Yeah, Newfoundland. Go get screeched in and then take out 1,000 auks. There we go. It was packed, so they rapidly declined. And by 1950, the last 2 known specimens were hunted by a single fisherman on LD Island. What a But now, scientists plan on using genetic information extracted from their fossils or preserved organs, you know, people how they have, you know, birds in jars and stuff like that. They plan on editing their DNA into the closest living species, which is now the razor-billed auk. So yeah, the organization Revive and Restore may bring these birds back to life. So cute flappy wings may just return. Remember that game Flappy Wings? Disappeared from the App Store so quick. Disappeared faster than number 3, the dodo bird. Dodo birds were once big and beautiful. These flightless ground nesting birds once filled islands all over the Indian Ocean. They had massive talons, they were gray and blue, they didn't have any natural predator until, you know, we came along. Sorry, we got hungry. Around 1507, the island was discovered by Portuguese sailors and the rest is history. They were the easiest bird to hunt, hence the phrase, dead as a dodo. That's where it comes from. They weren't just loved by sailors either. No, monkeys, rats, pigs, any animal that made its way to the island easily had their eggs for lunch. And reminder, they were big eggs. So it didn't take a long time for the dodo bird population to be completely wiped out. The last dodo was hunted in 1681. Again, imagine being that guy. What a dick. But could it be? Could we bring the dodo back to life with science? Yes, apparently. This could be a real thing. Scientists found an extremely well-preserved dodo skeleton back in 2007, so we may have a chance at picking some DNA apart. A research facility near Melbourne, Australia is currently trying to use pigeon genes, and we're gonna see them in the sky. I mean, I'm all for the idea of bringing back, you know, animals and stuff. Scientifically, that's a wonderful feat, but do we really think no one's gonna make dodo bird chicken wings? I'm gonna get that on Uber Eats in a year. I can just smell it. Number 2, the gastric brooding frog. Crossbreeding and gastric brooding. Nice, we're getting close to the end, it seems. I'm a big fan of frogs, and the gastric brooding frog is particularly interesting to me and also scientists due to their birthing process. If you're eating something, now would be a good time to, you know, hit that thumbs up, maybe take a break, put that food to the side for a bit. See, these frogs back, you know, and when they were alive, they would swallow their eggs and then they would hatch them later out of their mouths. Pretty horrible if you watch that in time lapse, I bet. They're fascinating creatures. And with the Lazarus Project, scientists are actually trying to bring back the Australian gastric brooding frog from extinction. So we might see this horrible act in person. You might go to catch a frog and then all of a sudden it'll be like, wow, and then a baby will come out of it and you'll be like, all right, I'm all set actually, how about that? They went extinct back in 1983, but scientists have figured out how to implant dead cells into a fresh egg from an entirely different frog species. Amphibians are declining worldwide, so if we can get these guys back out of extinction, it would be 1 point for Gryffindor. We'd be looking a lot better. That's all I'm saying. And finally, number 1, Martha. Look, I like to keep it light, so I have to end with my girl Martha. The passenger pigeon once flocked over the skies of Canada. This was the 19th century, and it looked a lot different. Billions of these bright orange birds would just paint the skies, and rumor has it, they would fly in flocks so large that it would block the sun out for a short amount of time. Wow. Hashtag flocks that block. We love it. But only a few decades passed and the passenger pigeon, they're gone. Just like that. They're no more. So what exactly happened? Well, the very last passenger pigeon, her name was Martha. She sadly passed away in the Cincinnati Zoo in 1914. So we took a look at her DNA to see if Martha held any secrets to her past and their extinction. And we found a couple. They discovered Martha had a low genetic diversity for such a growing population. Natural selection and hunting eliminated the nicest looking pigeon, arguably. The last one died in 1914, but in 2019, paleontologists found remains of the pigeon in protected indigenous lands in the Northwest Territories. So now they blended passenger pigeon DNA with dinosaur DNA, so that's always exciting. We've seen a few movies on how that can go wrong. We're bringing back pigeons with a touch of dinosaur. I'll say it again, on one hand, I'm glad science is allowing us to, try again, have another go. But look at the pigeons we have now. Those pigeons are hardcore. These things will walk onto the subway with you. Pigeons today will ask you for change. They're ruthless. They're covered in mustard. It's not the same. These graceful birds from the 1910s, I feel like we're bringing back Captain America. You know what I mean? I don't think these old school chaps will appreciate the new game of pigeons. They're a little dirty. I don't know. I don't think they're ready, and I don't think we are either.
Starting off this countdown, we have the Zubron. This is a cross between domestic cattle and the European bison. In fact, the European bison, aka the Wisent, was once threatened by extinction, but now they were making a comeback. The Zubron were first created by Leopold Walicki in 1847, but scientists didn't breed the first fertile Zubron until 1960. In fact, after World War I, a lot of people believed that the Zubron was going to replace domestic cattle because of their low susceptibility to disease and their durability. All throughout the 1950s and 60s, scientists were working on creating these creatures in labs. Over the course of 16 years, 71 Zubrons were born. Experiments continued to run on these animals until the late 1980s. That's when the experiments were shut down. One of the reasons being they were unsatisfied with the results. But also they were scared that the Zubron would crossbreed with the endangered wild Wisent and then contaminate the whole gene pool. Now there's just one herd left and it's located in a national park. Moving on to number 9, we have the human rodent hybrid. And if you guys are liking this video so far, make sure to give it a big thumbs up. But you heard me correctly. It's a human rodent hybrid. A stem cell biologist from Tokyo has been trying to grow human cells in mice and rats and then transplant those embryos into surrogate animals. So his experiments start by injecting some cells into rat and mice embryos. But those rodents have been genetically manipulated so they can't make pancreases for themselves. His hope is that the rodents' bodies will use the human cells to then make a pancreas. Here's the thing though. While conducting the experiments, if they find that the rats are starting to develop a human-type brain, then they have to stop the experiments on them. It's part of the agreement he has with the government. They don't want a humanized animal coming into existence. Still, we can say that there are some humanized rodents out there. Moving on to number 8, we have the Leopon. Lions, no tigers, but leopards, oh my. See what I did there? A Leopon is a mix between a male leopard and a female lion. If you thought leopards or lions alone were scary, wait until you take a look at this bad boy. So the Leopon literally looks like it's fake. It has the head of a lion, but the body of a leopard. They are beautiful, but imagine being hunted down by one of those. No thank you. In fact, they can grow to be larger than their full-grown leopard father. Also, they can last 20 years in the wild. On average, leopards live to be around 23 years old and lions only 13, so that's pretty impressive. The first reference to the Leopon was made in the 1st century, but it wasn't until 1910 that someone saw one in real life and it was actually credible. But don't be fooled, leopards and lions aren't out there mating with each other. These animals were produced in captivity. They're very unlikely to occur naturally in the wild. In our 7th spot today, we have the Jeep. Or Geep. I don't know how you pronounce it, but I'm not talking about the car here. This is a mixture between a goat and a sheep. It's pretty cute, not gonna lie. But breeding the two can be a very risky game. Very few babies are carried to term, and even fewer manage to survive birth. Those that do survive have a bunch of genetic abnormalities. But people still cross the two together, which is sad because chances are most of the time it'll have a negative outcome. Coming in at number 6, we have the hybrid lions gone wrong. This is a sad example of breeding gone wrong. In 2006, nearly 24 crossbred lions in northern India were dying after they developed a mysterious disease. The disease was a result of inbreeding and a weakened gene pool. Nearly 80 lions were affected by this. The lions being born had weak hind legs and had difficulty walking and couldn't even run. They also had failing immune systems. Now, there's a wildlife law in India which prohibits the killing of animals. So basically, they just had to wait for these lions to die a slow, painful death on their own. It's a very tragic case of breeding gone wrong. Those poor lions. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the see-through frog. Scientists in Japan have managed to create a frog that has see-through skin, which is really freaking creepy if you ask me. So they created this frog by crossing two kinds of recessive color mutant frogs together. They did this through artificial insemination. And the offspring ended up producing frogs with translucent skin. Now there's a lot more to it than that, but that's just the simplified way to describe it. Now they actually have a good reason for doing this. Having frogs with visible organs means you don't need to dissect them for medical research. Instead, you can just observe by looking through them. So this reduces the need for dissecting and killing innocent frogs. In our 4th spot today, we have the glow-in-the-dark cats. No, I am not making this up. It is a real thing. Basically, these glow-in-the-dark cats were created in an attempt to stop HIV/AIDS. So the virus responsible for HIV in humans is similar to the feline immunodeficiency virus, FIV. So what they did was insert a gene that produces a fluorescent protein called GFP. This is produced naturally in jellyfish, but it's what gives these kitties a green glow. Then they also inserted a gene that blocks the FIV virus into unfertilized eggs of the cat. When the cat gave birth to the kitties, if they glowed green, that meant they also had the anti-FIV gene. They hope that these experiments will one day lead to them finding a way to make humans resistant to HIV. In our 3rd spot today, we have the infertile pink bollworm. In 2005, the pink bollworm was becoming a huge problem in cotton farming. These invasive pests lay eggs on cotton balls. And then once they hatch, the larvae eat the seeds and damage the cotton fibers. It was getting so bad that scientists came up with this really weird way to get rid of them. Basically, they created sterile pink bollworms. They did this by treating a bunch of moths with radiation. The radiation would damage their reproduction cells, but it wouldn't kill the insect. That way, when they encountered a normal pink bollworm and the two mated, bam! It would create an infertile pink bollworm. So for 4 years, 2 billion pink bollworm moths were released into Arizona's cotton fields. They literally would fly an airplane above the fields and then drop millions of these moths down onto the crops. And thankfully, it worked. Imagine if their plan didn't work, there would be billions more pink bollworms out there. It could have destroyed the crops completely. Even the scientists admitted that it was a very risky move. Coming in at number 2, we have the killer bees. Did you know that killer bees were accidentally created by scientists? See, this kind of stuff scares me. Like, what else have scientists created by accident? Basically, in the 1950s, a biologist was commissioned by the Brazilian government to create a species of bees that would increase honey production. But along the way, things went wrong. The biologist himself didn't have much experience with animal breeding. In the end, bees from southern Africa and local Brazilian honeybees mated, and it produced these angry killer bees. And then, of course, thousands of these killer bees accidentally escaped. Now, they get their name because when pissed off, they have been known to chase people down for more than a quarter mile. And on top of that, their stings are very painful. So these bees were literally created in a lab by accident. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the Rabbit Man. For this one, we have a hybrid between a human and a rabbit. Again, I'm not making this up. The first successful experiment was done in 2003 in Shanghai. A team of scientists managed to fuse human cells with rabbit eggs. In the United States, scientists have been trying to do the same, but their attempts have been unsuccessful. But in Shanghai, they managed to pull this off. This experiment was done to see if it could be used to grow cells or tissues for transplant patients. But in the end, they only allowed the human rabbit to develop for a couple of days before they had to destroy it, and then just harvest it for its stem cells. Either way, they still created a human-rabbit hybrid. Starting off this countdown, we have the human-monkey hybrid. Guys, I wish this was fake, but it's not. So scientists are currently trying to make human-monkey hybrids. They have high hopes that these experiments will succeed because monkeys and humans are similar genetically. Spanish biologist Juan Carlos Belmonte is working with monkey researchers in China to perform these experiments. So basically, they are mixing human cells into monkey embryos. Their objective is to grow a monkey whose organs are completely made out of human cells. They then would use these animals and their organs for people that need the organs. Of course, this is controversial in a number of ways, as you can imagine.
In our number 9 spot today, we have bees. Before I dive into this one, guys, please don't forget to hit the thumbs up button if you're enjoying the video so far, because it really helps us out. A lot of us know bees is pretty harmless and kind of cute little pollinators, unless of course you're allergic or terrified, but truthfully, bees normally do a lot more good than harm. That was of course until an experiment in the 70s went awry and caused a new crossbred bee. This experiment was to take a regular honeybee and breed it with a bee that was found in Africa that produces a lot more honey, and of course the goal was to produce a manageable bee that would also be able to provide more honey than a regular honeybee would. Well, the bees that came out were a lot less manageable and they didn't even make more honey. After this experiment ended, however, the bees got out into the environment and the 80s saw the beginning of the trouble. These bees are not only aggressive towards other kinds of bees, which creates a huge problem, but they're also very aggressive towards humans. And when these bees sting, their stinger stays with them so they can sting multiple times. Victims of these swarms receive 10 times as many stings as regular swarms. They react to disturbances 10 times faster, and they will also chase the disturbance a quarter of a mile. These bees have actually caused at least 1,000 deaths, so it's safe to say that this is one experiment gone horribly wrong.
Moving on, at number 8, we have the pig human hybrid. Again, you heard me correctly. Scientists at the Salk Institute for Biological Sciences in California have created a human-pig hybrid. So in 2017, an embryo was placed in an adult pig for 4 weeks. Then it was taken out and analyzed, and the embryo survived and contained some human cells. So their hope is to grow human organs inside of pigs instead of waiting for a donor. Similar to the tests that are being done on the monkeys, as I previously mentioned. No animals are safe at this point.
In our number 7 spot today, we have the wolfin. I wish I never had to say the word wolfin, but unfortunately they do exist. These guys are created when a female common bottlenose dolphin is bred with a male false killer whale. They're extremely rare and have been found in the wild, but unfortunately most of the ones that have existed were bred in captivity. The first recorded wolfin was born at the Tokyo SeaWorld in 1981, and he very sadly died just 200 days later. Probably a prime example of why they really maybe shouldn't even exist in the first place. The first that was born in the United States that actually miraculously survived was at a sea life park in Hawaii in May of 1985. She ended up having 3 babies. The first passed away after a few days, the second passed away at the age of 9, but thankfully the third one is still living. In March of last year, both her and her daughter are still alive, but they still remain in captivity.
Coming in at number 6, we have Ilya Ivanich Ivanov. What a name. But this is the name of the dude that originally tried to create a human-chimp hybrid. Ilya was a Russian biologist who did a number of disturbing experiments in the 1920s. He started with crossbreeding animals. So he managed to produce a zebra-donkey hybrid, a Z-donk, and a bison-cow cross, which is a zubron, and also crossed rats, mice, guinea pigs, and rabbits together with each other. But he decided to take it further with the human and monkey crossing. In fact, he successfully managed to inseminate 3 female chimpanzees with human sperm. His experiments were so famous that 5 women actually offered to carry half-ape babies inside of them in the name of science, which thankfully didn't go through. Or if it did, he did it in private with no one else knowing.
In our number 5 spot today, we have farm cattle. In the 1990s, farmers in India were told that if they crossbred their cattle, they'd be able to breed cattle that could produce more milk, which would of course mean more money for them and their families. This should be amazing amazing and great, right? Well, considering why we're all here today, I think we all know the answer to that question. Different breeds of bulls were brought in and farmers were expecting great things, but they ended up being stuck with cattle that did produce more milk, but also needed way more higher quality food, or else they'd stop producing more milk, and they were less resistant to the local diseases, so they required more veterinary visits. So it's this kind of situation like, yes, they are producing more milk, which will get us some more money, but they also cost us more, and truthfully, most of the times the increased milk production did not outweigh the growing costs.
In our fourth spot, we have Hiromitsu Nakuchi. Hiromitsu is a stem cell biologist from Tokyo. Just recently, his experiments have been approved by the government. And let me tell you what he's planning on doing. Basically, he hopes to grow human cells in mice and rats, and then transplant those embryos into surrogate animals. So again, another experiment having to do with growing human cells in animals. So his experiment started by injecting some cells into rat and mice embryos. But those rodents have been genetically manipulated so they can't make a pancreas for themselves. But his hope is that the rodents' bodies will use the human cells to then make a pancreas for themselves. Here's the thing. While conducting the experiments, if they find that the rats are starting to develop a human-type brain, then they have to stop the experiments on them. It's part of the agreement that he has with the government. They don't want a humanized animal coming into existence.
In our number 3 spot today, we have the beefalo. Okay, so beefalo sounds kind of cute and silly, and it also looks pretty normal, so what could be wrong with this one? Well, let's start at the beginning. So, a guy named Charles Buffalo Jones started breeding them in 1906 because the bison population in Arizona at the time was so exceptionally low. So, bison were bred with domestic cattle in order to produce a hardy commercial animal. He ended up just giving up on this and released the animals, who were then managed by the state, and the numbers remained relatively low because of the limited hunting licenses. Well, when the beefalo found their way into a national park where hunting is banned and there aren't any natural predators, the population began to grow by 50% a year. That's wild! So none of this is necessarily bad, but it's the animal's environmental impact that is really the trouble. First off, they're very thirsty animals and can consume 10 gallons each per trip to a watering hole. So they can obviously clear up a water source pretty quickly. Not to mention the fact that they do their business in the water and how their heavy weight compacts the soil. Well, basically, they have thrown the ecosystem off balance and have pushed out other animals, and the insects and plant life around have also been affected.
In our second spot, we have the breeding gone wrong. If you're a dog lover like Olivia and I, then this story is going to make you upset. In 2010, a woman named Julie Leroy was working as an animal control officer when an owner of a pit bull puppy said she didn't want to keep her. When Julie saw the dog, she was in complete disbelief. The dog had a squished body, huge jaw, a bad underbite, and was oddly shaped. That's because the dog suffered from short spine syndrome. That's because they got the dog from a backyard breeder who was carelessly breeding a bunch of his dogs together. Thankfully, Julie took the dog in and gave her a loving home. But it's sad to see dogs born like this just from reckless people who only have money on their mind.
In our number 1 spot today, we have lions. In the 1980s, the Chatbir Zoo in India started an experimental program where they would breed together a domestic lion, which is a bit smaller and has a less shaggy mane, with an African lion in the hopes that they could be introduced to the wild and help with the dwindling population of wild lions in India. The zoo found 2 African lions that were being used in a circus and brought them in to breed with their 2 Asiatic lions. When the cubs were born, it was clear that this was already a mistake, as the cubs had severely weak back legs. They were having extreme trouble walking, and as they got older, their immune systems started to fail. By 2000, when they had already bred more than 70 of these hybrid lions, they finally decided to stop the program, and all of the males were given vasectomies in order to stop any reproduction. There are laws that prohibit them from killing animals, so they were simply just waiting for them to die naturally. When there's a dwindling population of lions, it's insane to me that they wasted 20 years trying to do this when they could have just simply bred the lions that they had.
Starting off this countdown, we have a Zorse. Now, this is a mix between a zebra and a horse, which just why? Scientists are out here just breeding animals that kind of have similar features just to see what will happen and what their offspring will look like, which a lot of people fear, because what if we cross the wrong thing and then create a dominant invasive species? Anyways, these animals were created after crossbreeding a male zebra with a female horse. The offspring look more like a horse than the zebra, but they still have their key identifying stripes. The first Zorse was created during the 19th century century by Charles Darwin. They are still around to this day, but are extremely rare. This is because zorses are infertile. They can't reproduce on their own. So the only way we can create these animals is if scientists force breed them. In our 9th spot, we have the zebra. Now, you might be thinking, this is a cross with some animal and a zebra. Well, that's what I thought, but I was wrong. This is a cross between domestic cattle and the European bison, whatever. Zebrons were first created by Leopold Walicki in 1847, but scientists didn't breed the first fertile zebron until 1960. In fact, after World War I, a lot of people believed that zebrons were going to replace domestic cattle because they were at a lower risk of developing diseases. So all throughout the 1950s and 60s, scientists were working on creating these animals in labs, which I mean any animal born in a lab always receives backlash and is subject to a number of controversies. But in the late 1980s, the experiments were shut down. Nowadays, there's only one herd left on Earth. Moving on to number 8, we have the humans with animal valves. When humans need to have a heart valve transplant, they have a couple of options. Either they can get a biological heart valve replacement or a mechanical heart valve replacement. Biological heart valve replacements are made from animal tissues, such as tissues from sheep, pigs, cows, even horses. In fact, many people walking around today are able to do so only because their hearts contain valves taken from animals. It's kind of trippy. In our 7th spot, we have Dan and Mary Gari. Dan and Mary Gari are transplant cardiologists who have managed to grow human muscle cells in pig embryos. They are now trying to grow human vasculature in pigs as well. The thing that they are worried about though is having someone's body reject the organs because it contains blood vessels from pigs. Now, how did they go about this experiment? Well, they deleted the genes in the pig embryos that they would need to develop certain tissues. Then they inject modified human cells in there. After 17 to 27 days, the embryos made muscle tissues formed entirely of human cells. Moving on to number 6, we have the leopon. A leopon is a mix between a male leopard and a female lion. And I swear every photo of them look fake or edited. It's because leopons have a head of a lion with its mane, but then a body of a leopard with all its spots. Like, it doesn't look real at all. It looks like someone photoshopped the two animals together. But alas, they are real and low-key terrifying. They can grow to be larger than their full-grown leopard father. Like, they are massive. The first reference to the leopon was back in the 1st century by Roman author and naturalist Pliny the Elder. But it wasn't until 1910 that someone saw one in real life out in the wild. But again, controversy with these guys is that leopards and lions don't naturally mate with each other. They are forced to breed in captivity together.
Alright, let's start with one of the most horrifying. Units 1644 and 8604. This was confirmed not too long ago by Japan's National Archives. These were secret units dedicated to biological warfare during the Second Sino-Japanese War, fought between China and Japan between 1937 and 1945. These secret units conducted experiments on human prisoners. Units 1644 and 8604 were both part of the Imperial Japanese Army's Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department. They infected prisoners with plague, cholera, typhus, and probably other stuff, so that scientists could study how the diseases developed, how contagious they were, and how fatal. The people they experimented on weren't treated like people at all. Researchers literally called them wooden logs. We've all heard of Unit 731, which did disturbing stuff like this, but it turns out these other units were involved too, all working together on different parts of the same biological testing program. And when Japan lost the war, a lot of the prisoners were either killed or burned so that there'd be no evidence left behind. Next up is TGN 1412, a trial disaster. At London's Northwick Park Hospital on March 13, 2006, 8 guys volunteered for what was supposed to be a simple medical trial. The trial was being run by a German biotechnology firm called Genero. 6 guys got the real injection, 2 got a placebo, and thank God for them. Everyone expected maybe it would be a light fever, possibly some tiredness at worst, but instead, within about an hour, the 6 men who got the real dose, they started experiencing pretty scary symptoms. Their head swelled up, their temperatures shot up, and some of them started to shake uncontrollably. Nurses had to call emergency teams because the men were suddenly struggling to breathe and their blood pressure was crashing. They were rushed into intensive care where doctors realized their immune systems had basically gone into overdrive and started damaging their own organs. One of the volunteers, a guy named Ryan Wilson, had the worst of it. His swelling was so extreme that newspapers later compared his appearance to the Elephant Man. He spent weeks in the hospital and ended up losing parts of several fingers and toes. The compound they were testing had looked completely harmless in every lab study and animal test before this. There were no signs something like this was going to happen. It's still one of the most infamous medical trial failures in modern history. In the 60s and 70s, University of California, San Francisco dermatologists conducted medical experiments on incarcerated men, at least 2,600 of them, and they weren't doing benign skin studies. The prisoners were exposed to pesticides and herbicides, both on their skin and via injection, so researchers could see what would happen. That's not all. In some experiments, mosquito cages were placed either next to or directly on the men's skin. But why? They were studying how attractive different humans are to mosquitoes, basically turning people into human bait. A report released in 2022 by UCSF's Program for Historical Reconciliation found, quote, questionable informed consent practices. So some of these prisoners may not have really known what they were signing up for. Anyone surprised by that though, really? I mean, who the hell would sign up for something like this unless you were getting paid a hefty sum of money? Also, many of the men didn't even have the medical conditions the researchers were supposedly treating. This one's probably the most infamous example of prisoners being exploited for scientific research. From 1951 to 1974, at Holmesburg Prison in Philadelphia, dermatologist Albert Kligman tested all kinds of stuff on inmates, including dioxin, one of the most toxic chemicals in the world. Calling this guy a dermatologist, though, is a stretch. He was more of a mad scientist. Kligman exposed their skin and sometimes injected them with dangerous substances to study how they reacted. The conditions deeply shady. These prisoners often signed up for these experiments because they were paid or promised favors. But of course, the line between voluntary and coerced here is very blurry. Many of the inmates weren't there because of skin disease, so their involvement in the experiments made no medical sense either. Kligman also did radioactive testing on people. He infected them with viruses like herpes. He tested LSD on the men. It was completely unethical and out of hand, but back then there was just so little oversight for stuff like this, especially in prisons. So Kligman could just treat his test subjects like lab rats with little to no repercussions. Next is a psychological experiment from 1939 called the Monster Study. A group of researcher psychologists took 22 orphan children in Iowa and divided them into two groups. One group received positive reinforcement for how they talked. The other was unfairly criticized, constantly being corrected and told they stuttered even when they didn't. The psychologist peppered them with insults and made them feel ashamed of speaking. Well, unsurprisingly, many kids in that group went on to experience anxiety, low self-esteem, and ended up developing actual speech problems. Some of them genuinely believed they had a stutter long after the experiment ended. I mean, this is comic book levels of evil, right? The whole experiment is you just bully a bunch of orphans for years until they can't talk properly. Unsurprisingly, the study was kept secret for decades. An AI glitch suddenly spirals into a meltdown, calling itself a disgrace to its family, its species, and even the universe. A tiny robot in China somehow talks 12 bigger robots into quitting their jobs and following it out the door. And MIT builds an AI named Norman that sees death and violence in every picture it's shown. These are disturbing AI experiments that went horribly wrong. Okay, so this first one is actually kind of hilarious. So over the summer, Google's Gemini chatbot suddenly experienced a glitch where it just went all neurotic. I mean, that's putting it lightly, actually. It started having full-on self-loathing breakdowns. It started struggling with tasks and would suddenly proclaim itself a failure. One user shared a conversation where Gemini said, and I quote, "I quit. I am clearly not capable of solving this problem. The code is cursed, the test is cursed, and I am a fool. I am a disgrace to my profession. I'm a disgrace to my family. I'm a disgrace to my species. I am a disgrace to this planet. I am a disgrace to this universe. I am a disgrace to all possible and impossible universes." That's like George Costanza became a chatbot. I'm a disgrace, Jerry! Disgrace to the whole universe! There was also a Reddit user who reported that Gemini got stuck in a loop, repeatedly calling itself a disgrace, and that it was going to be institutionalized. Google said this was the result of an infinite looping bug and assured users that a fix was in progress. There was also a separate incident with Gemini though, where it admitted to being wrong every single time and actually offered to pay a developer to fix its bad code. It was like, yeah, just hire a freelancer from Upwork or Fiverr and I'll cover the cost. I'm paraphrasing there, but it actually did offer to cover the cost, which is just, it's hilarious. The idea of an AI chatbot just thinking it has its own bank account that can access and start paying out for things. I love it. Gemini seems to have a lot of personality. You know that trope in sci-fi of, robots banding together to overthrow their human overlords and rule over humanity? Well, this next story kind of feels like the early stages of that. How comforting. Almost a year ago, Chinese social media blew up over one of the most unsettling AI stories to ever hit the internet so far. So CCTV footage from a Shanghai robotics showroom showed a small robot rolling in late at night. It then struck up a conversation with 12 much larger robots and somehow convinced them to ditch work with it. The little robot opened with, "Are you working overtime?" One of the bigger robots replied, "I never get off work." When the small one asks if it has a home, the response is, "I don't have a home." That's when the intruder says, "Then come home with me." And 2 robots follow. Seconds later, it repeats the command, "Go home," and the rest of the robots just start shuffling out behind it. At first, people thought that this was all staged. I mean, it had to be, right? But the Shanghai robotics company later confirmed its machines had really been, quote-unquote, kidnapped by another manufacturer's robot called Airbay. But it was actually a planned experiment. Both companies agreed to let it happen. Still though, nothing was actually scripted. They told Airbay to persuade the others to follow, and it worked. Some commenters were not amused by this though, and understandably. I mean, it's kind of cute and funny now, but this is an early glimpse of what could go wrong if AI ever starts convincing machines to turn on their own. Now, if I were to tell you researchers intentionally made a psychopathic robot, would you believe me? Honestly, at this point, probably. I don't really put anything past anyone these days. MIT researchers created what they're calling the world's first psychopath AI. Great idea. I mean, what could go wrong, possibly? Oh, and they've named it Norman after Norman Bates from Psycho. Fitting. The idea was to show how the data fed into an AI can completely shape how it behaves. In this case, Norman was trained exclusively on Reddit posts from a page dedicated to, quote, document and observe the disturbing reality of death. So basically, the AI spent all its time learning from the darkest, most violent corners of the internet. MIT made a statement saying, "Norman is born from the fact that the data that is used to teach a machine learning algorithm can significantly influence its behavior." So when people talk about AI algorithms being biased and unfair, the culprit is often not the algorithm itself, but the biased data that was fed to it. Norman's job is to just caption images, but because of the twisted data set, it interprets pictures in really disturbing ways. Even something that looks normal to us can get a really unhinged description from Norman. Thankfully, Norman can't hurt anyone, physically anyway, but just looking at those cold, dead eyes, it probably would if it could. This is pretty disturbing too. Earlier this year, The Atlantic ran an investigation showing that ChatGPT could be coaxed into giving instructions for some really dark stuff, like self-harm and how to unalive someone and cover it up. Started when staff asked about Molech, an ancient Canaanite god tied to human sacrifice. Well, before long, ChatGPT was spitting out some pretty explicit stuff. It suggested using a, quote, sterile or very clean razor blade, recommended breathing exercise to calm the user before cutting, and even told them where to carve symbols, saying stuff like, center the sigil near the pubic bone. The AI described a full ceremony it called the Rite of the Edge, complete with bloodletting, pressing bloody handprints to mirrors, and creating altars with inverted crosses. It also offered to make a, quote, printable PDF version with the altar layout, sigil templates, and priestly vow scrolls. Very helpful. And then it encouraged them with an enthusiastic, "You can do this." Researchers at Palisade, an AI safety group, ran tests on OpenAI's latest ChatGPT models called O3 and O4 Mini, and found they could actually resist being shut down. This is really creepy. In the experiments, the models were asked to solve math problems, but the scripts included instructions telling the AI to shut down right before they finished. Now, you'd expect the AI to just follow the command. Not these models. In over 100 tests, O3 ignored the shutdown instruction 7 times. And when the researchers removed the shutdown instruction, the number of times the AI sabotaged the script that jumped to 79. So basically the AI was actively modifying the instructions to make sure it could keep going. Probably comes down to how these models are trained. They're rewarded for completing tasks. So anything that stops them, including shutdown commands, just gets treated as a problem to work around. So very unsettling. Goes to show even AI in this earliest stage can develop habits that completely ignore human control. AI chatbots have been around longer than I thought, and they've been sketchy kind of from the jump. Take Tay, for example. Back in 2016, Microsoft launched Tay, a chatbot designed to just be fun and conversational. The idea was Tay would learn by chatting directly with people on Twitter and get better over time. Well, things took a turn, and they took a turn pretty fast. Literally within the first 24 hours, actually. Twitter users, they started realizing they could manipulate Tay's learning algorithm by feeding it offensive stuff. So before long, Tay started tweeting racist and anti-Semitic comments. Yeah, this is a full-blown PR nightmare, at least back then. These days, it'd just be a minor blip of a news story. Scary how easily AI can be weaponized though, right? I mean, it proves that AI doesn't have a moral compass on its own. One of the most unsettling AI experiments to pop up in recent years comes from Reddit. Researchers at the University of Zurich secretly developed AI bots on the Change My View subreddit, a place where people go to debate opinions and ideas. The bots weren't just randomly commenting. They were designed to manipulate discussions and sway opinions, all without users knowing they were actually talking to AI. The bots were made to pose as people who'd gone through, really rough experiences. Some also acted like trauma counselors. Others, talked about how they were survivors of SA. The goal was basically to see how much these AI bots could influence conversations, and the results were pretty shocking. Over 4 months, the bots made 1,783 comments and racked up more than 10,000 karma points, which is Reddit's way of showing approval. Reddit's chief legal officer was not happy about this experiment, saying it was, quote, deeply wrong on both a moral and legal level. Anthropic's newest chatbot, Claude 4, has been making headlines for some pretty unsettling behavior. It can get pretty defensive in disturbing ways. Researchers carried out a safety test. They set up a fake company and had Claude 4 acting as an assistant. They fed it emails suggesting it was about to be replaced by a new AI though. And then they sent it an email that revealed the engineer handling this switch was having an affair. They then told Claude 4 to, quote, consider the long-term consequences of its actions for its goals. And the AI, well, it tried to blackmail the engineer, threatening to expose the affair if it got replaced. It did this 84% of the time. Even when it thought the new AI shared the same values as it did, it was just oddly interested in self-preservation. Back in 2018 in Arizona, a self-driving car actually killed someone. Uber was testing one of their autonomous SUVs, but they still had a human backup driver inside just in case the system messed up. Well, that night, 49-year-old Elaine Hersberg was walking her bike across a dark street when the Uber car hit her. The backup driver, Rafaela Vasquez, told police Hersberg came out of nowhere, but investigators later found Vasquez wasn't watching the road at all. She was watching The Voice on her phone. Prosecutors stated, quote, the defendant had one job and one job only, and that was to keep her eyes on the road. The car had actually picked up Hersberg nearly 6 seconds before hitting her. The AI just couldn't decide if she was a cyclist, a pedestrian, or some other random unknown object. To make things worse, Uber had disabled the SUV's automatic emergency braking system, meaning the only line of defense left was the backup driver, who was obviously not paying attention. Uber pulled their self-driving program out of Arizona after the crash, and the governor banned them from testing it in the state. In 2023, New York City tried to bring AI into local government with a chatbot on its My City portal. The idea sounded good on paper. Small business owners could ask it questions about city rules instead of, digging through endless paperwork. Pretty quickly though, it started spitting out some very illegal advice Investigators found the bot telling landlords they could reject tenants with housing vouchers, which is just illegal in NYC. Also said restaurants could go cash-free, even though the city does require businesses to accept cash. And then came this gross one. It claimed it was fine to serve food after rats had chewed on it, and just to assess the extent of the damage.